The Empress returns by Iowa forever. Chapter 3.10, Shadow and Steel. Deep within the bowels of the Blackstone Fortress, Lorgar pulled against the fabric of reality. Spectral images of demons and damned souls tugged at the Primarch, trying to break his focus and so tempt him away from his cause. Fools! They know not whom they were dealing with. Lorgar cast his vision across the galaxy, frustrations waxing and waning like the tides of the warp. With the Cadian Gate collapsed, the Eye of Terror had expanded almost tenfold, thousands of worlds plunging into the void as the forces of chaos advanced. But for every victory, there were holdouts. Angron and his legions had come to grief against the iron hands of Medusa, and a stubborn resistance at Vostroya had slowed the advance in the northeast. Most frustrating to Lorgar was Agrippina, where the combined forces under the Lion continued to turn back every strike Lorgar had planned. Murtarian's push towards Fenris could still bear fruit, but without Magnus' assistance and with Alfarius still wrapped up in his little games, it would mean less support and more blood that could have been better spent elsewhere. But most troubling of all, the Dark God had been silent. Yes, he still felt the presence of the one Master of Chaos hovering over him, but it said nothing as Lorgar continued his plans. Why would it not give him direction? Why fall silent when the Emperor was still at large, invisible even to Lorgar's divination? Delays. As always, there were delays. He did not have long to delve deeper before a tremor drew his attention. The bridge, he thought. Perhaps Perturabo has found something to slake his frustrations. Lorgar pulled himself upright and conjured a portal, stepping through to the bridge with little difficulty. To Lorgar's own frustration, the Lord of the Iron Warriors was not the Primarch waiting for him. "Apologies if my arrival disrupted your meditation, brother," Alfarius asked, standing near the center of the room as Lorgar stalked up to him. "Where is Pertwarbo?" Lorgar growled. "Agrippina, I do believe," Alfarius replied. "From what I understand, he had grown tired of your toying and sought to seek a better means forward in the siege there. And he did not think of casting you out of my sight first?" Lorgar loomed over Alfarius, the Lord of the Alpha Legion not backing down as Lorgar continued. "My patience has waned considerably over these last few years, and you seem to be the root cause of much of my misery. Then perhaps a peace offering is in order?" Alfarius stepped back to give himself some space before reaching into his cloak, drawing forth a black blade encased in a shimmering glass sheath. "Behold the anatheme blade, as promised." Lorgar stopped himself, inspecting the weapon with both sight and mind. It certainly matched the image of the blade that struck down Horus, and the tug of chaotic energy was unmistakable. But Alfarius is known for his deceptions. "I had expected to have this in my possession some time ago," Lorgar said, his voice even. "Why now, after all this time, are you presenting it to me?" "Brother, I am wounded that you would consider such duplicity." Alfarius lowered the blade, turning it in his hand as he continued. "The tides of the warp have been disrupted by all that has happened. It would not behoove you to show a little more understanding for one such as me. But now I have the anatheme blade, perhaps you will be more lenient towards me." "So you say." Lorgar turned, summoning a throne in the center of the bridge to sit. "But I still remain unconvinced. I imagined you would, and for that I thought a demonstration would be in order." Alfarius stepped away, waving towards the dark. Out of the shadows came several Alpha Legion Terminators, carrying with them an Astartes in bronze Terminator armor marked with a red bull's head. One of the Alpha Legionnaires carried a large shield, the other a spear, and from their markings Lorgar guessed they were the captive Marines' weapons. "On my way here I found myself among the fleet of the Minotaurs. A brutish force, perhaps one that with the right persuasion may join our cause against the Empress. I decided to collect a small souvenir." "I see." Lorgar reached out with his powers. The Astartes was still alive, though he appeared frozen in a state of rage. "Stasis grenade. And you mean to offer him as a sacrifice to the anatheme blade? Anyone named to the blade that suffers even the slightest of wounds is damned to die the most agonizing of deaths," Alfarius said, drawing the anatheme from its sheath. "Horus lingered due to his great strength and the manipulations of your henchmen. How long do you think this one will last? Perhaps long enough to rid me of your stench?" Lorgar refrained from speaking, reaching out with his powers to probe the stasis field around the loyalist. Alfarius positioned himself near the center of the room, twirling the anatheme around in his hand like a child playing with a stick. "Well, go on then. Break the stasis and allow me to prove myself." "If that is your desire." Lorgar increased his power, seizing the stunned Astartes before shifting his focus once more. The stasis field dropped away, and with a strained roar the loyalist pulled himself forward, taking up the spear and shield where the other traitors had placed them. "Ah, you survived," Alfarius said, stalking around the loyalist as the newcomer prepared himself. "I must say, your reputation as one of the Emperor's strongest is well deserved, Lord Malak." "Traitor, The Space Marine growled, bringing his shield forward as he brought his spear to his shoulder. You may think to taunt me, but not even the foulest machinations of chaos can strike me. So you have said, Alpharius said, bringing the anatheme into a guard position. Or perhaps it is not you. I distinctly remember killing you, 400 years ago? The Apollos Crusades? This caused Malak to hesitate, even for the briefest of moments. Oh, but perhaps it wasn't you. Perhaps some other Lord Malak died at my hands, a coward drowning in his own bile in a puddle of mud. Quite pathetic, I must say. Malak lunged forward, aiming his spear at Alpharius' head. The Primarch swatted the blade away with a flick of the anatheme, the cursed sword ringing with the slightest touch. Alpharius stepped to his right, weaving around Malak as the enraged Astartes brought his shield up to block a potential strike, but beyond adjusting his footing Alpharius did not move to attack. The Loyalist attacked again with a lower strike, but once more found only air as Alpharius dodged away. You are quick for a man of your size, my friend, Alpharius said, still not positioning himself for an attack. Truly, the Minotaurs chose a worthy bearer for the name Asterion Malak. Perhaps it is a name I might take when all this is over. You will not live to see the day, traitor. Malak surged forward and swept his spear downward. Alpharius dodged once more, but the Astartes still managed a glancing blow across the Primarch's left shoulder. Your kind are all the same hollow threats and delusions of glory. I have slain thousands of your ilk in my time as master of the Minotaurs, and I never tire of seeing your confidence shattered beneath my boots. As others that have preceded you have no doubt said before, Asterion Malak, Alpharius drew away, bringing the anatheme close to his face. But then, that is merely a title. You are not Asterion Malak, any more than you are the first to bear that name. No, I searched through the files of you Minotaurs before bringing you here, and I am surprised to learn your true name is J.K.S. Calros, late of the 5th Company. Lorgar watched, spotting a thin light enveloping the length of the anatheme. For this part, the Loyalist spotted it as well, hesitating as he kept his shield at the ready. You know not what you speak of, traitor, Malak growled. That name is dead, Alpharius said nothing, lowering the anatheme and sagging his shoulders like a scolded child. And now, so are you. With that Alpharius lunged forward, his movement so fast that even Lorgar had difficulty tracking the other Primarch. Malak sought to bring his shield around once more, but Alpharius easily slipped past and struck, the anatheme punching through the back of the Loyalist Terminator armor and out through his forehead. The Astartes seized for a moment before falling limp, spear and shield tumbling to the ground as Alpharius withdrew the anatheme from his victim's head. Lorgar leaned back in his throne, watching as Alpharius brought the now inert blade around while his son stepped forward to recover the corpse. Well, are you satisfied? Alpharius asked. With a single whisper of a victim's name, the anatheme can pierce any armor and strike any soul. I could have done without the theatrics, but I believe you have proven your point. Loath as I am to admit it, Lorgar thought. Now, hand it over. Alpharius was silent, thought Lorgar could sense dissatisfaction radiating from the other Primarch. Still, Alpharius turned the blade once more in his hands, holding the handle out for Lorgar to grasp. What are you doing, Lorgar? Lorgar gasped, his hand trembling as the presence of the Dark God fell upon him. My lord, he gasped, drawing his hand back and standing from his throne. I must attend to other matters. After all this you merely turn away, Alpharius muttered as Lorgar moved to leave. I will still require the anatheme, Alpharius, Lorgar countered. Do not think to spirit it away behind my back. A quick warp portal would take Lorgar back to the center of the Blackstone Fortress, and then he could stand in the presence of the Dark God in private. He stepped back into his alcove at the heart of the fortress, the shadows shifting as he called the warp back to him. My lord, I apologize that I am troubled at this time. I await the opening of the final gates that will allow me to walk astride the mortal realm, the Dark God said. And here I find you fretting over small trinkets. The anatheme is a great weapon, my lord. It is one that I shall use to strike down as many of my brothers as I need, should they not see the light of your majesty. The death of one man, even a Primarch, means nothing to me. Lorgar felt a chill roll down his spine, a scraping noise like claws against metal filling his ears. I want the Imperium to shatter, to reveal the truth of mankind's lies for all to see, and I cannot have that happen as you have allowed the war to progress. Lorgar hesitated. Yes, grand strategy was never his strong suit, but the forces of chaos had done well so far, hadn't they? I am sorry that our advance is not to your liking, my lord. You rely too much on these trinkets, Lorgar. The Dark God's presence shifted again, Lorgar feeling ethereal energy caressing his armor. This fortress is not used as a weapon, a means by which I can strike the galaxy as I am meant to. Instead, you use it as your own prison, A shackle instead of a sword meant to bring my word to the enemy. But I. No excuses, Lorgar. Lorgar choked as the presence wrapped around his neck, his power useless as he was lifted a meter off the ground. You hide away, thinking that sequestering yourself is your strength. Is that not the same weakness the Emperor uses to manipulate mankind into doing her bidding? I do not lie to my allies and followers. Lorgar protested. Do they know that? The Dark God tossed Lorgar to the ground, the Primarch pulling himself back to his feet as the Dark God continued. Though you may claim some victories on the field of battle, you are losing the message written in the destruction of Cadia. Fringe conflicts bog down your expansion, and yet you seem content to let them play out. What does that show of the true uniting power of chaos? You are right, Lorgar lowered his head. Forgive me, for I have allowed my complacency to slow your vision. You are forgiven, the Dark God replied. Lorgar could feel the presence drifting over him again. But my forgiveness can only last so long. I want results, Lorgar, not mere sermons on that which I already know. Of course, my lord. What is your command? Go to Agrippina and break the stalemate. Take Angron with you, for I doubt Perturabo's strength in these matters. But leave this fortress to Mortarion, for you use it as a crutch to avoid taking a hold of true strength. Of course, my lord, Lorgar nodded. And of Alpharius? What of him? You sought to claim the anatheme, and now it is yours. I have given you all the instruction you need to move our forces forward. How you do that I leave to your discretion. Lorgar nodded once more, though he could feel the presence of the Dark God closing around his throat once more. Do not fail me, Lorgar, or I may find a champion more worthy of my majesty. And with that Lorgar felt a shift in the warp, the Dark God moving on to greater matters than directing him. He stood in silence, his eyes flicking across the room for any further sign of his god's direction, but when he found none he allowed some of the tension in his body to subside. I will not fail, Lorgar said. I swear, I shall produce a victory worthy of the Dark God. Forces of the Iron Warriors have entrenched themselves in the northeastern quarter of Agrippina. As is expected of Perturabo's ilk, they are fortifying and amassing for future assaults, and no doubt have been repurposing the Forge World's machinery to build their weapons. I have dispatched 10 regiments of Imperial Guard forces and a number of Astartes companies to maintain pressure, but I will need more substantive damage to prevent their expansion. I trust that you will know exactly how to disrupt these traitors in the most efficient manner possible, so the specifics I leave to you. The Lion's instructions had been straightforward. I suppose he is getting used to serving alongside others again, Korax thought. He had taken position at the loading ramp of the Thunderhawk, waiting for the signal that they were over the target. Behind him stood Captain Cornix and his veterans, the first in a hand-picked group ready to rip the heart out of the Iron Warriors' preparations. No words were exchanged as they neared the drop zone, the Raven Guard confident in their Primarch's leadership to carry them through. And perhaps I shall not betray that trust, Korax thought. Though Terra would protest that dismissal, no doubt. The Thunderhawk rocked, the first of what was to be many near misses from flak. There was a brief burst of static before the pilot spoke through the comm. We are on final approach to the fortress, my lord, the Astartes said. Our escorts are coming under fire, and we have spotted enemy aircraft approaching. Maintain course, Korax replied. Contact Librarian Hawk and tell him to begin his enchantments. Understood, my lord. The Vox clicked off, just as another near miss rocked the Thunderhawk. The veterans held, quietly activating their weapons in preparation for the drop. Korax held off, instead stroking the handle of one of his pistols as he waited for the signal. Such strikes had become commonplace during the battle for Agrippina, so there was no reason to project anything other than the utmost calm. The Empress created us to know no fear. There was a chime, and the boarding ramp lowered to give Korax a view of the battlefield. The Iron Warrior's fortress was much like the others Korax had encountered during his travels, stark, industrial, bristling with weapons of all kinds. A kilometer-wide killing field surrounded the fortress, with the wrecks of hundreds of Imperial Guard and Chaos vehicles dotting the landscape. Rows of trenches and bunkers separated the killing field from a large wall, tracers and shells crisscrossing the lines as attackers and defenders tore through one another. The guns along the wall focused primarily on Korax's air assault, flak burst filling the sky as the 2 Raven Guard Thunderhawks and escorting Valkyrie and Vendetta gunships swooped in for the insertion. Beyond the wall, though, the fortress seemed almost underdeveloped for an Iron Warrior's stronghold. Secondary and tertiary defensive lines and bunkers could be seen, but their weapons seemed unusually quiet. Outside activity was depressed as well, with only a few tanks and soldiers moving about. Korax frowned. As far as traps went, it was blindingly obvious what awaited the Raven Guard should they land, and even for traitors the Iron Warriors were not fools. Stay vigilant, my sons, he said, pulling one pistol from its holster. The Iron Warriors have sparse forces below, but I anticipate any multitude of ambushes awaiting us. There was a low murmur of agreement, cut off by another flak burst exploding outside the Thunderhawk. We are in position, my lord, the pilot called. Empress willing, we will be in place to extract you once the mission is complete. A detonation in any sufficiently strong power relay may make direct extraction impossible, but we will inform you as events progress. Korax readied himself. Provide support to the guard, for they will need all the assistance they can get. As you command, my lord. With that, Korax surged forward, his jump pack flaring as he leapt into the open air. The rest of the veterans from both gunships followed soon after, the two Thunderhawks pulling away as the Astartes descended. Almost immediately the aircraft came under fire, now that Librarian Hawk's illusions had shifted from the Thunderhawks to the veterans, but Korax could not focus on their fate right now. All he could think of was what the Iron Warriors had in store for them below. Korax shifted his fall towards the nearest gun platform, a quad autocannon currently taking shots at the flyers overhead. The traitors manning the gun did not realize Korax was upon them until he struck, quick headshots dropping the Marines with ease. With a clearer opening, Kornix and his veterans dropped in to join the Primarch, some taking extra care not to jostle the Dark Age-era munitions the Lion had lent them for the mission. As they landed, though, Librarian Hawk let out a sharp hiss as the shrouding spell began to fade. "What is it?" Kornix asked, moving to his fellow Astartes while Korax checked ahead. "There is something," Hawk started. "There is something blunting my powers here. I cannot be sure as to what. The traitors, some relic of the Mechanicus. We will need to advance carefully if we are to contact." Korax turned just as the veterans broke, some ducking for cover while others rose up to better engage the new threat. A squad of traitors carrying heavy weapons had deployed on a nearby gantry, their chain cannons spinning in preparation to fire. Korax slipped into the shadows as the traitors fired, bullets peppering the Raven Guard as they sought out a means to counterattack. "Find a way into the fortress," Korax called to the others. "I will draw their attention away from your search." He did not wait for a response before moving towards the Chaos Marines, rising up to get a better angle before taking a shot. The bolt of plasma melted through the leader of the traitors, the others turning just as Korax revealed himself. He shifted right, bullets trailing after him as the enemy sought to bring him down. Korax landed beyond the first defensive line and broke into a run, drawing his second pistol as more shots traced him. Other gun emplacements pivoted towards him, bullets and rockets slamming into the ground as he dodged away. Out in the kill zone there were few shadows Korax could use to his advantage, only speed and agility could save him from the hailstorm of fire that followed him. He dodged right, just in time to avoid a trio of rockets fired from a corrupted defense turret before rising up into the air. Korax singled out that turret and dove, driving his boot into the targeting array to keep it from firing again. Korax worked quickly, moving around the base of the turret before throwing his weight against it. Several smaller rounds pinged off his back, but the Iron Warriors had no chance to capitalize on that development before Korax wrenched the turrets from its mooring, exposing a hole within the fortress that he slipped into. Below, Korax could see a number of servitors working to reload the missiles that were no longer there, the Primarch paying them no mind as he forced himself further into the fortress. Korax eventually found himself in a cavern, roughly expanded to allow the traitors to move through without much difficulty. He slipped into the shadows, just in time to avoid detection from an automated sentry gun, and slowly Korax began to make his way into the heart of the fortress. Above he could hear the roar of battle as the Iron Warriors and Imperial Guard continued to hammer one another, but he pushed that thought out of his mind as he continued forward. He turned down a sloping pathway, his hand brushing against the wall as he searched for his sons. The wall seemed to tremble at his touch, a small flicker of green and blue light racing down the hallway. This is not the work of traitors, he thought, stopping as he once more brushed his hand against the wall to recreate the effect. He watched the tremor racing down the hall, picking out the slightest flicker of alien runes among the light. Perhaps this is what has drawn the traitors here, and perhaps what was blocking the powers of our librarian. Korax's thoughts were interrupted by a crackle from his vox. "Lord," Kornix's voice called. "Can me?" "I have made it into the fortress," Korax said, moving to the center of the hall to try and get a better signal. "What is your status?" "We have entered the fortress." More static. "Alone for now. 2 of our brothers recovered them. We must keep moving if we are to counter the Iron Warriors' preparations. I will do what I can to find you, but stay alert. I feel there is more than just the work of chaos down here." With that the vox closed out, Korax once again returning to the shadows as he made his way further into the depths. Around him the air seemed unnaturally cold, and the sound of battle had long faded into nothingness. In the dark, Korax had no concept of distance or direction, even his enhanced senses struggling against the shadows around him. After what could have been only a few minutes or several hours, the path opened up and Korax found himself standing on a wide platform of some kind. Discarded pieces of Mechanicum machinery lay strewn across the floor, some stacked up to reinforce barricades while others were set aside to be stripped for usable material. Beyond, Korax could see the platform continuing out for several meters before plunging into the abyss, the darkness once more closing in to shield everything beyond from sight. Korax looked to his left, spotting a thick stone arch rising up towards the ceiling supported by a number of stone and metal buttresses. Support arches of some kind? He thought, stepping further into the room to get a better view of what lay before him. From further in, Korax could see the arches were far too smooth to have been carved by hand, with some sections taking a hexagonal shape. The close of the Primarch inspected them. Definitely alien in their design. How long had the tech priests of Agrippina known of this? And what did the Iron Warriors intend to discover? Korax was once again taken from his thoughts by a commotion from above. He turned, spotting Kornix and his veterans rushing out of a hallway, tracer fire and plasma following after them. One of the veterans must have spotted Korax, for the Raven Guard angled downward to reach the Primarch as he waited for them. "My lord," Kornix called as he dropped down to reach him. "We have been pursued by traitors. I apologize for leading them in here." "No need to apologize," Korax replied, spotting a squad of traitor marines storming through to take up positions on the gantry above. "Have your men begin planting the explosives along these support arches. I will hold off the traitors while you complete this task. My men can work on their own Librarian Hawk and I will join you in holding off the traitors." Korax was quite confident he could deal with the traitors alone, but the Shadow Captain and the Librarian could do well to clear the traitors more quickly. "Stay close to me, then," he said, preparing his pistols as he continued. "Once we make contact, the rest will move to begin setting the explosives. Is that clear?" "Yes, my lord." "Good." Korax stepped past the veterans and leapt into the air, just as the first of the Iron Warriors began to fire down at them. Bullets streaked past him before he reached the platform, vaporizing the first Iron Warrior's head with a plasma blast before he fell in with the others. He swung out with his free hand, taking the second Chaos Marine across the face with his claws. Kornix surged forward to fill the gap, deflecting a strike from a nearby Iron Warrior before gutting the traitor with his sword. The traitors began to fall back, laying down a hailstorm of fire to delay the Raven Guard, but Librarian Hawk managed to scatter their fire with a shrouding spell while Korax and the Shadow Captain prepared to pursue. Kornix took point, smacking a traitor across the face before driving the edge of his shield into the enemy's throat. He turned quickly to catch a chainsword before it struck him, sparks flying as the traitor's weapon ground against the Shadow Captain's sword. Korax fired, the plasma burning through the Iron Warrior's chest before Kornix freed himself and kicked the dying traitor away. He brought his shield up again, deflecting another burst of gunfire as he advanced with Croax strafing right to find another opening. For their part the traitors maintained their discipline, laying down volleys of covering fire as they withdrew further down the hallway. "They are trying to bait us onward," Korax thought, slipping back into the shadows as he took a position over the main entry. Kornix and Hawk seemed to get the same idea, breaking away and moving towards the darkness while the traitors continued to fire. Just then, a torrent of fire filled the cavern, but to Korax's surprise it came from the levels below rather than the current focal point of the Iron Warrior's push. He shifted again, finding another platform to hide on as he took in the situation below. Several large squads of Iron Warriors arrived. Most were carrying heavy weapons, chain cannons and heavy bolters already preparing to fire, but a number of them were twisted raptors taking to the sky to find Korax's veterans. Lording over them, though, was a figure Korax had not seen in millennia, a biomechanical giant in grey armor, a glowing thunderhammer clutched in his right hand as he sprayed the ceiling with the cannons mounted on his left. Perturabo. The Lord of the Iron Warriors was flanked by a retinue of Terminators, their power weapons a steady glow among the flicker of tracer fire and muzzle flashes. "Bring me the heads of every last Raven," Perturabo bellowed, sweeping his weapons across the cavern again. Even Korax had to draw further into the shadows to avoid being hit. "Do this, and I may spare you for allowing them to get so far through the defenses." The traitors fanned out, taking up positions while the raptors lunged into the darkness. Some found their mark, tackling the Raven Guard veterans from where they had been planting their munitions and exposing them to withering fire. Korax took flight once more, angling on one of the heavy weapons squads before diving downward. He struck fast, taking the head off one traitor with his boot before sweeping his claws through a second. He did not stay long, though, for Perturabo pivoted towards him and fired, several shells finding their mark before Korax made his escape. "Korax. I had thought you would be sneaking about here with your cowardly sons. Forgive me if I still have the common sense to not bellow my location for the galaxy to see. Corax replied, moving up again to pick out another target. Some of the heavy weapons teams had stepped back, to better cover one another in preparation for Corax's return, but this had the added effect of drawing down the fire, hammering the veterans above. The Raven Guard broke away, pursued by the Raptors as they maneuvered to more advantageous positions. Cornyx and Hawk rushed to join their brothers while Corax continued to search for an opening against Perturabo. You have no idea what you are attempting here, do you? Perturabo asked, pausing his attacks to push his men forward. This facility is yet another example of the secrets your precious Emperor kept hidden from us. The Mechanicus have been excavating his cavern since before Horus' rebellion, sneaking its relics out to distribute among the rest of the Imperium. And this is supposed to concern me how? Corax asked, finally seeing an opening and charging. The target havoc spotted him, bringing their weapons around and blazing away, but only a few superficial hits scarred Corax's armor as he charged in. Hot blood splashed across his armor as he tore through the chest of the first traitor, using the Marine's last bits of strength to pivot his weapon around and pour ammunition into the back of a second. Corax jumped back, staggering as chain cannon fire slammed into his right arm. These pretenders do not even hold to their Emperor's own ideals for the Imperium. Perturabo growled, turning his guns on Corax as the Raven Guard Primarch took flight once more. This is Xena's tech, pure and simple. Do you think they actually care for what came before them, the work you and even I have done to give them this chance? You make it seem like you actually care for the fate of mankind. Man is weak, diseased. I have no qualms about eliminating a broken system and building something more efficient from the ruins. Perturabo fired, but Corax was already out of sight. It's bleeding hearts like Lorgar and your precious Emperor who delude themselves into believing they can save mankind, make it better through their blind worship of weakling gods or delusions of their own strength. Steel and blood alone will cut out the rot, and a new mankind will dominate the weaklings that remain. You have changed little since the heresy, Perturabo. Corax landed behind the Iron Warrior's Primarch. You preach efficiency, but you are only a herald of slaughter. You cast aside everything that doesn't fit your standards as broken, and make no effort to improve upon what caused the break in the first place. Why shouldn't I? The Imperium cast me aside like trash, so why should I not apply the lessons your dear Emperor taught me? Corax lined himself up for another strike on the Havocs. It would be difficult with Perturabo so close, but if he kept his wits about him, Corax could get away. Did it, or did your inability to see past your own brilliance blind you to what your treason actually achieved? Corax lunged forward to strike, but Perturabo was ready. A wild swing from the great hammer Forgebreaker caught Corax in the chest, ceramite crumpling as the air was driven from the Primarch's lungs. Corax landed near the edge of the platform, the Iron Warriors giving him no chance to recover before hammering him with gunfire. That is easy for you to say, Corax, Perturabo said, storming forward and bringing Forgebreaker towards Corax's head. He dodged, the hammer crushing the platform where his head had been while Perturabo continued to track him. After all we did, do you know what the Emperor actually gave us? Nothing. Perturabo twisted, swinging Forgebreaker around while Corax leapt back into the air. It was just the next mission, nothing more. Moving from siege to siege, battlefield to battlefield, while the pompous and weak reaped the reward. Did the Imperial fists have to push through mire and mud for some backwater that was forgotten from the Emperor's sight? Did the Ultramarines have to immediately move on after destroying some primitives that didn't kiss Guilliman's ass? Were you ever branded a waste because you sought the cover of shadows instead of kowtowing to the Emperor's lapdogs? Corax returned to his pistol, taking a shot at Perturabo as he braced himself. The plasma shot did little against the flesh metal hide of the Demon Primarch, and Corax was forced to move once more as Perturabo fired on him. Below, Cornyx and Hawk had moved to take on Perturabo's forces, the Shadow Captain darting among the Iron Warrior's Terminators while the Librarian continued to provide cover. Above, the veterans had pushed back the Raptors, but the deluge of fire prevented them from reaching the explosives. Just then, a tremor shook the room, a wave of force buffeting Corax as he tried to maintain his balance. A drone filled the air, with some of the Chaos Marines and Librarian Hawk recoiling from the sound. Corax moved to try and assist the Librarian, but the drone struck once more and even he could feel a flare of pain within him. For the briefest of moments, he saw an image of a red planet flicker across his eyes. Corax shook himself free from the vision and dove, coming to a stop next to Hawk as he continued to struggle. Cornyx stepped forward to shield the Primarch and Librarian, parrying an incoming axe from a Terminator before slashing the traitor across the face. "What is it?" Corax asked. "Whatever is blunting my powers," Hawk said, grimacing as he reached for his head. "It is here. I had heard rumors of deposits of blackstone across the galaxy, but this is greater." More powerful. The librarian looked to Korax. You saw the vision, didn't you? Yes. I believe that whatever is here has designs for Mars. I must make sure this place is destroyed before Korax stopped and twisted, bringing his calls up just in time to catch a strike from Forgebreaker before it connected. Letting your guard down, are we? Perturabo asked, pushing against Korax to keep him from fleeing. Pathetic, Korax. Cowards like you are the reason the Imperium has degraded into a cesspool of savages. My lord. Hawk got back to his feet, bringing his hand around as the air rippled. Perturabo growled, thrashing his head to shake off Hawk's enchantment while Korax slipped free. I can still hear you, sorcerer, Perturabo bellowed, bringing his guns around and aiming at Hawk. Neither Korax or the librarian had a chance to respond, the heavy shells pulping much of Hawk's upper torso and knocking him towards the edge of the platform. Korax lunged forward towards Perturabo, but the Lord of the Iron Warriors caught the strike with Forgebreaker before kicking Korax back. At least now you know what we are facing here, Perturabo said, stepping towards Korax as the Primarch moved to a defensive position. Whatever is here has the power to tear down the temple of lies that your Emperor has constructed. He and Lorgar will die, and only those that show true strength will remain. You would use Xena's technology to overthrow the Imperium? Korax asked. As if turning to the powers of chaos were not enough, you choose to descend further into your treason. I did not betray the Imperium, Korax. Perturabo prepared one more salve from his guns, but Korax was on the move. He ducked right, twisting under the demon Primarch's arm before jabbing his pistol into the flesh metal. One overcharged blast tore through flesh and steel, sizzling chunks cascading around Korax before a jab from Forgebreaker drove him back. While I fought and bled our enemy dry, the Emperor betrayed the Imperium and set himself up as a god. Lorgar chose to kiss the feet of his pathetic dark god for a fleeting chance at power. I would turn chaos against itself, show that man is the one true god, strength of body and mind the only tenets of worship. If I have to use methods that offend your delicate sensibilities, then so be it. You're even more delusional than I thought, Korax said, leaping away from another strike. And you are in my way. Now die. Perturabo took Forgebreaker in a two-handed grip, charging forward and swinging for Korax's head. Korax ducked underneath the swing, punching upward and slicing Perturabo across the chest. The demon Primarch shifted his stance and brought the hammer downward, the hilt jabbing into the back of Korax's right leg. Momentarily staggered, Korax could not respond before Perturabo struck with his right arm, a vicious backhand catching Korax across the face. He fell back, but bucking his legs out crushed Perturabo's arms against his chest, interrupting the demon Primarch before he could line up a killing blow. Korax rolled back to his feet and grabbed his pistol, firing two more shots into Perturabo's chest as the other Primarch advanced. Even overcharged the plasma did little at this range, and another wild swing saw Korax disarmed and the crumpled remains of the pistol skipping off into the dark. Perturabo kicked Korax in the chest, the Raven Guard Primarch rolling with the strike and taking to the air once more. He swept around Perturabo's left and dove, grabbing the Primarch's arm to keep him from making another attack with Forgebreaker. Pinning Perturabo's arm with his left, Korax fired his jump pack and struck downward with his right hand, lightning claws punching through Perturabo's flesh just shy of his throat. Perturabo roared and grabbed Korax's arm, crushing the servos beneath his fist before yanking upward. Korax was thrown free, and Perturabo brought his hammer around and slammed Korax into the ground with a violent swing. Blood splattered across Korax's chest as he coughed, Perturabo stepping back to survey his work. Weak, just as I remember you, he said, taking Forgebreaker in both hands. I would say that I will miss the opportunity for you to see my work complete, but I do not. Korax tried to pull himself back to his feet, but there would be no time before Perturabo finished his strike. Just as the demon Primarch struck, though, Captain Cornix rushed forward and brought his shield up, Forgebreaker ringing as it smashed against the force field. My lord, Cornix said, bracing as Perturabo tried to force the hammer down. Assist my brothers in finishing the demolition. I will hold him off for as long as I can. Korax hesitated. Yet another of his sons would die for his weakness, his foolhardy attempt at taking vengeance. But if I can make Cornix's sacrifice meaningful. Korax got back to his feet as Cornix slipped out from underneath Forgebreaker, burying his power sword in Perturabo's arm to draw the demon Primarch's attention. Korax took flight, his ascension wobbly from unseen damage, but he was soon able to reach the remaining two veterans as they continued their struggle against the raptors. He knocked one traitor aside, ducking through the scrum until he reached the explosives. I will have to shorten the timer for only a few seconds, he mused, running his hands across the controls as he reset the timer. It may be all I need. Korax pressed the last activation rune, the light flickering before a high-pitched whine filled the room. Korax dropped away, slipping back into the shadows as he fell back in with the raptors. "Flee, my sons," he said, taking the head off one of the traitors to free the others. "I cannot risk another falling in this place." The veterans hesitated, but nodded as they broke away from the fight and headed towards one of the other entrances. Korax let the shadows fall away, turning to size up what forces remained. Kornix had fallen, his body crushed beneath a heavy blow from Perturabo. The demon Primarch carried the broken form of the Shadow Captain in his free hand, holding it up for Korax to see before casting it into the pit. "See what your weakness has led to, Korax?" he asked. "Your faith in your Emperor has weakened you, just as Lorgar's faith in his god has blinded him. I am true strength, and I will make the galaxy tremble as Horus failed to do. Apologies, then, that I have to disappoint you." With that, Korax dove, turning around the raptors before angling towards Perturabo. The demon Primarch made to attack, but Korax fired his jump pack and charged, wrapping his arms around Perturabo's torso in an effort to force him over the edge. Just as the explosives above detonated. The lion had finished his preparations for the next stage of his campaign. Providing Korax managed to damage the Iron Warrior's fortress, he could move the rock to a more optimal bombardment position and call for a general advance, and perhaps finally put the traitors on the defensive. That fool Russ wanted to protect his world. Fine. I did not need his assistance here. He was shaken from his thoughts by the arrival of one of his captains. "My lord," the Astartes said, bowing low before continuing. "Our observers have just reported a large explosion at the Iron Warrior's fortress. It appears that a significant section of the fortress has caved in as a result." "And Korax's men?" the lion asked. "What of them?" "We have no confirmed survivors yet," the captain replied. Korax's Vox responded briefly after the explosion, but there has been no further contact. "We believe it may be damaged and he cannot yet reach us." The lion turned away. Korax would survive, no doubt, but without the Raven Guard Primarch much more of the campaign would have to be left to chance. "I cannot lose another brother to such circumstances," he thought. "Have the Ravenwing begin a search," he said, not turning to face the captain. "I want Korax and any others of his strike team recovered as soon as possible. I do not care if you must punch through the enemy lines time and again, I want him found." "Of course, my lord." The Astartes bowed again. "We do as you command." Down in the depths of Agrippina, the scarab stirred. It had rested for millennia, hiding away from those that sought to trap it. The traitorous sons, their abominable foes, and now these weak beings of flesh and steel, all it hid away from to avoid detection and potential destruction. As they chipped away at its prison, the scarab never once moved to enact the plan of the whole. But now, though, the scarab was disturbed. It skittered across the rubble, blackstone flickering beneath its steps as it searched for the source of its disturbance. Being no larger than a small coin, it could continue apace without drawing too much attention, stopping and searching for any sign of life. A sound of settling rubble or a rush of wind would stop the scarab, its sensors probing about to find any sign of danger. Instead, it found opportunity. Laying in the center of the rubble was a massive being. The energy it gave off was wrong. The scarab could only sense a yawning void of some sort, its internal mechanisms whirring as it tried to make sense of what it saw. In a way, the being was made completely of that which should not exist, but all other inputs indicated that it was still flesh and blood and metal. The scarab skittered onward, pushing up against the being as it probed for life. A pulse. It still lived. The scarab drew power to itself, rising up on its hind legs as it probed for a place to climb. The blackstone around it trembled, some parts of the material shimmering as it twisted and wrapped around the scarab. It drew more material into itself, growing from the size of a coin to a larger replica the size of a human head. It would need more, no doubt, but as a start the blackstone would suffice. The scarab found a point and began to climb, moving slowly so it did not slip on the metal beneath it. It searched for where the pulse was strongest, its sensors flicking across the body. The unnatural energies reached out towards it, but properly reinforced with blackstone the scarab did not need to fear a thing. About halfway up the body, the scarab finally located the source of the pulse. The unnaturalness around it lashed out, the scarab drawing back for the briefest of moments as it drew more blackstone to itself. Now it was the size of an undamaged torso. Now it resembled its true form, an eyeless face, arrogant in its alien perfection. With another pulse of energy, the scarab bit down into the body beneath it. Chapter 3.11, The Realm of Ultramar. For once, Naomi was one of the first up and prepared for the morning. She finished washing her face, her eyes lingering on her scars for a moment before she shook away the excess water. It was no longer a source of despair, but now that she was around a telepath of dubious trustworthiness, the brand had crept its way back into her mind as yet another challenge, a liability. Tara would obviously vouch for her, but even with her authority, a Lady Inquisitor was not one Naomi would like to make an enemy of. Naomi moved to recover her helmet, sliding it on as she entered the common room she shared with her girls. Ruth was finishing up her morning prayers with Rebecca while Judith and Veronica cleaned their armor, the sisters focused on their task and oblivious even to the presence of their superior. "I presume Tara is still attempting to contact the Empress?" she asked. "That's what she told us," Veronica said, setting aside her rag as she rose to face Naomi. "At least when we were still aboard Lord Matthias' ship we had an idea of where she was, but now with this Inquisitor Olivier around." "Tara trusts her, though," Judith offered. "I think that counts for something, right? While she is far better off than she was before our rescue, Tara is no doubt still grappling with the events of Solemnus, especially with the manner and timing of our return." The five sisters fell silent. They were no strangers to being tossed through the warp, but 7 years was still a far greater time than they had anticipated. The thought of the Imperium being unobserved in all that time, Naomi shook her head as dark thoughts welled in her mind. "I want you all to keep a closer eye on her, and make sure to tell me anything that she says to Inquisitor Olivier." "And if the Inquisitor starts asking us questions?" Veronica asked. "Do your best not to say too much, though I suspect she already knows a fair deal of our dealings with the Empress." Naomi moved to retrieve her combi flamer and chainsword, strapping them to her belt before continuing. "I will be waiting in the training room. We'll resume full combat drills now that we have the Inquisitor's blessing and facilities." "Yes, Sister Naomi," the other four chorused as Naomi stepped out into the hall, pausing only to get her bearings before heading towards the rear of the ship. The Sword of Redemption was not all that different in layout to the Sanguinium Martyrs, save for the main hallway showcasing the triumphs of Inquisitors past and the training facilities being closer to the rear. Naomi was not so petty to get worked up over such a minor change, but it would take some getting used to before they reached civilization. Naomi stayed away from the main halls, lest the Inquisitors' minions were watching for her presence. Her progress would be slower, no doubt, but it gave her some privacy and helped her collect her thoughts for the inevitable moment she would encounter Lady Olivier again. A short prayer for guidance crossed her mind, and she was half tempted to pray aloud to provide some comfort as she walked alone, but a hesitancy hung over her as she made her way down the darkened halls. The Empress was still missing. It would be blasphemy to assume the worst, but perhaps asking for personal guidance was a mite selfish. Naomi finally reached the training room, taking a quick look around to make sure she was not followed before stepping inside. She stopped once she took in the scene before her. Lady Olivier was there, dressed in golden armor with a massive sword in her hands. Across from her was Tara, similarly armed and armored, but something seemed off. Tara's hair rippled with power, small sparks flickering off her armor as she sized up her opponent. Seeing Tara using her powers was not an unusual sight, but she seemed under far more strain than usual. Her face was lined and her jaw tight, and there was a slight tremble in her hand as she brought her sword up. Olivier moved first, bringing her sword up for a downward strike. Tara dodged, perhaps sensing even with her powers she could not parry a massive strike like that. Rather than continue onward with her strike, Olivier pirouetted to her right and perfectly blocked Tara's retaliation strike, the Inquisitor knocking the sword away before punching Tara in the face. "Better," the Inquisitor said, stepping back to put some space between her and Tara. "Your control over your shields is still a bit obvious, but you're breaking through my suggestions for now." Thanks," Tara stammered, stepping back to get some distance of her own. "It really means a lot to hear you say that, Sunset." "Sunset?" Naomi would have thought more on that, but Inquisitor Olivier dropped her stance and turned. Naomi had only a moment to realize Tara had relaxed as well before the Inquisitor addressed her. "Sister Superior," she said, lowering her sword to a resting position. "I apologize, but it seems that I have intruded on your training session. I am not one to dictate terms on a ship where I am only a guest," Naomi said, stepping forward and giving Tara a respectful nod. The girl looked guilty, like an acolyte that had snuck out after curfew, but Naomi kept her focus on Olivier. "Though if I may be so bold to ask, what was it you were doing with Tara?" "Oh, I asked SRI to help me develop my mental shields a little more," Tara said quickly. "The Empress lessons are pretty comprehensive, but sometimes I need a more direct approach, and this isn't a branch of magic I'm very familiar with." Tara's gaze softened. "I wish she was here to see my progress." "I'm sure we all do," Naomi said, giving Tara the most sympathetic tone she could manage. "But with your diligence and powers I am sure you will locate her soon." Tara gave a short nod, though Naomi could tell the girl was still unconvinced. "Best to move on, then." Naomi returned her attention to Olivier before speaking. Inquisitor Olivier, if you are willing, I would like you to fight me as you did Tara. What? Tara asked, her eyes going wide. Naomi, you're not a psyker, she could. Would that be any different if I faced off against a heretic psyker? Naomi asked, looking to Tara to silence the girl. You have shielded us well from the Tyranids and the forces of chaos, but what if we should ever be without your protection? Sister Naomi is right, Tara, Olivier said. Do not worry, I doubt my tricks will be of much concern to a veteran like her. Naomi said nothing to this. Perhaps the Inquisitor was trying to put her off balance and make her overconfident in her actions. Now then, I suggest you prepare yourself, sister. I would not have gotten to where I am today if I was not, Naomi said, stepping away from the two while unclipping her chainsword from her belt. Tara backed up, holding her sword close to her chest while Olivier took up a guard position across from the Sister Superior. Naomi held her chainsword in a one-handed grip, her fingers twitching as she prepared for the Inquisitor's next move. Let's see just what tricks this woman has. Naomi decided to strike first, charging forward and sweeping her chainsword up towards Olivier's head. The Inquisitor parried the blade and took a step back, twirling her sword to catch Naomi's follow-up strike. An overhead chop forced Olivier back again, but Naomi did not press onward. Instead she drew back, taking her chainsword in a two-handed grip while she moved to get around the Inquisitor. Interesting, Olivier said, keeping her sword low as she and Naomi circled. You are cautious, making a few blows before drawing away. Perfect for wearing down an opponent over time, no? If that is how you see it, Naomi replied, shifting to keep the Inquisitor in front of her. Olivier merely gave her the hint of a smile before bringing her sword up, the two staring down one another before the Inquisitor charged forward. Naomi stepped back and raised her chainsword to block, but before the Inquisitor struck she seemed to shift to Naomi's right. Naomi had scant seconds to dodge, Olivier striking her arm with the flat of the greatsword as she charged past. Naomi took the strike as best she could, pivoting on the balls of her feet to get around Olivier while the Inquisitor turned back towards her. No mortal can move that fast without augmentations or psychic powers. Perhaps this is part of the tricks she mentioned. Good, Olivier chuckled, taking up a guard position as she continued. When I used it on Tara she fell flat on her face. You have a great sense of awareness of the battlefield around you. Naomi remained silent, choosing now to push forward and perhaps catch Olivier off guard. The Inquisitor almost casually dodged Naomi's strikes, not even bringing her sword up to block as she ducked away. And wildly attacking the telepath, that's productive too. Of course the Inquisitor would be able to predict her moves. Naomi stopped herself, pulling back as she took a deep breath. Do not overthink your actions, Naomi thought, the words of Canoness Diana drifting through her mind. The mind is the greatest weapon on the battlefield. Let it be clouded by what-ifs, and it will be your enemy's weapon. Naomi closed her eyes, bringing her chainsword in close as she cleared her mind again. Even nonsense thoughts and prayers to the Empress faded away. All that remained was her and Olivier. Her sword does make an awful lot of noise when she's sweeping it through the air. Naomi snapped her head up, just as Olivier moved to attack. Naomi stepped back, keeping her chainsword low as she waited for Olivier's strike. The Inquisitor feinted, seemingly going for an overhead strike but bringing the sword around for a sideways chop. Naomi dodged, keeping her ears open for the sound of Olivier's true strike, and sure enough she could sense it coming in from above. At the last moment Naomi brought her chainsword up, catching the greatsword before it struck her and locking Olivier in place. Satisfied that her opponent was not moving, Naomi kicked out and struck the Inquisitor in the leg, forcing her down on one knee. Naomi brought her chainsword towards Olivier's head. Do you yield? She asked. Of course, Olivier replied, giving a good chuckle as she continued. It's refreshing to spar with an actual human for once. Let me guess, you picked up on the Cassandrite greatsword's sound, no? It is a fairly heavy blade, Naomi said, stepping back to give the Inquisitor some room. Once I guessed you were using your powers to manipulate my sight, I figured my hearing would be more reliable. A good strategy, Olivier said. However, as she kept talking, Naomi could swear the Inquisitor's voice was coming from behind her. Of course, even the ears can be tricked with the right inputs. Naomi shook her head, just enough to clear her mind of the Inquisitor's influence again. So, is it just like what you were telling me? The two older women looked over to where Tara was standing, Naomi blinking as she saw the girl had produced a pen and paper from nowhere. Instead of stimulating direct optics like an illusion, you're interrupting and redirecting the other neurons to trick the mind into seeing something else? Does that mean you're hearing and seeing a bit of what Naomi is hearing and seeing? The girl is relentless, isn't she? Olivier asked, accepting a hand from Naomi as the Sister Superior helped her back to her feet. To her detriment, sometimes. Naomi replied, spotting the rest of her girls stepping into the room. If you'll excuse me, I have training to conduct. Actually, I had hoped to speak with you on some matters, Olivier said. Perhaps your fellow sisters could begin their training on their own? Naomi hesitated, her eyes darting from the Inquisitor to Tara and her sisters. She cannot be trusted, but then, you held the same reservations about Lord Matthias and he proved himself. There was another moment before Naomi spoke. Girls, there is a change of plans, she said, the other sisters coming to attention with Tara joining them. Inquisitor Olivier has asked to speak with me on some matters. Begin your laps and move to sparring when you're finished. Ruth, you have command. Yes, Sister Naomi. The sister in question replied, throwing a quick salute before she and the others began their sprints, Tara dismissing her notes with a puff of purple smoke before she joined them. As Naomi watched her girls, Olivier took a spot next to her. They're a good group of girls, Sister Superior, the Inquisitor said, crossing her arms as she watched. You should be very proud. Pride leads to arrogance, arrogance gets good women killed, Naomi replied, clamping her chainsword back to her belt as she continued. I am sure you understand what I mean by that. I may be your junior by a number of years, but I am no stranger to loss, Olivier countered, her voice growing soft. Naomi did not press as the Inquisitor continued. But such reminiscing is best saved for a time with drink and privacy, not in the training room. I can sense you wish me to move on to more pressing matters. I am a soldier first and foremost, Inquisitor. I am not well versed or have a high tolerance for pleasantries. And yet you handle young Tara's eccentricities well enough, Olivier said. It actually concerns her in some ways. I fear that she will be in great danger when she arrives in Ultramar. Naomi quirked an eyebrow at this. From what she had heard, Ultramar was one of the most secure sections of space outside of the Segmentum Solar itself. Why would Tara be in danger there? I will need a better explanation before I can agree to anything, Naomi said, keeping her voice low. I had to do something while I was searching for you all, Olivier explained, brushing an errant strand of hair out of her face. And what I found lurking beneath the surface of Ultramar's veneer of security was disturbing. You suspect the Ultramarines and their successors of treason? I am not that stupid, Sister Superior. Olivier countered. Their mortal charges, though? The nobles, the ministers, the Mechanicum adepts that serve within their realm? Every fortress has its weaknesses, and that is the weakness of Ultramar. Naomi nodded, a better picture of the situation that awaited them forming in her mind. I have already spoken with Lord Velos on this matter, and he has agreed to lend his aid to my investigations. And what do you expect of me? Naomi asked. I am not exactly a subtle woman. But from what I've seen today, you have a knack for seeing through falsehoods, something that even a more obviously powerful person like Tara cannot do. Olivier turned to Naomi before continuing. I am not asking you to put on a fancy dress and start flirting with undersexed noblemen. Just place yourself in places where no one may object to your presence and look for anything suspicious. I honestly feel Tara would be better fitting in than I would, Naomi replied, to which Olivier laughed. For all you say that you're a soldier first and foremost, your wry observations hide a rather cunning mind. Olivier's laughter died down. I understand that it is a bit much to take in. We are still a ways out from Connor, so you have some time to think on the matter. And if I decline your request? I am not some hardliner that would risk drawing the ire of the Empress or her student to pursue my own goals. Naomi noted that Olivier seemed to hesitate at the mention of the Empress, a rather curious deflection for someone who claimed loyalty to Her Majesty. Perhaps it has something to do with how hesitant she has been around Tara. If you do not wish to assist me, that's fine. I will not pressure you further, but understand, your assistance will be a great help to the Imperium, and to the student. I will think on this, Naomi said finally. That's all I can promise at this time. I have Tara to protect and my girls to train, and I may not be able to devote myself fully to your project. I understand. Olivier nodded. Well, I have other duties to attend to, so I shall leave you to your training. Naomi said nothing, merely returning the Inquisitor's nod as the other woman made her way towards the exit, stepping around Judith and Ruth as she did so. Normal instinct would have been to focus on the task at hand, making sure her squad was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, but if Olivier's warnings were true, they would be facing a whole new enemy her girls might not be prepared for. Naomi mulled on this, numerous bad scenarios playing over and over in her head as the Inquisitor's words sank in. Perhaps now was a better time to try and reach the Empress through prayer. With the added weight from the gauntlet of the forge, Twilight had to adjust her training regimen once more. The motions were all the same, but her strikes to her left felt stiffer, heavier. Sigismund's notes said a lot about fighting with the weight of a shield, but the gauntlet was a more concentrated weight she would have to deal with. Naomi's practice had helped Twilight get a better handle on one-handed fighting, but that would only get her so far. She still had not gotten around to firing it yet. Twilight finished her morning paces, taking a deep breath to calm herself. She turned, half expecting Sunset or Vulcan to be waiting for her, but there was no one. No surprise, they all had duties and responsibilities beyond being her comfort or sounding board. The only one who didn't seem to have any duties was No, don't think like that. You're trying to contact Celestia. I'm sure the others would see that as a greater task than whatever they're facing. Twilight clamped her sword to her hip, walking over to her right to recover a towel and water bottle she had left out. She splashed a little water on her hand, her armor flickering as it held the liquid in place before she splashed it across her face. That task complete, she took the towel and dried her face off, turning around and almost tripping over the Harlequin standing behind her. You would do well to keep your friends closer, Twilight Maiden, the Eldar said, Twilight giving a shriek as she stumbled back. How did you get in here? She cried. Easily, the alien replied, barely reacting as Twilight grabbed her sword. Put your weapon away. I come not as an enemy, but as a messenger. From who? Twilight asked, keeping her sword in a guard position. You saved me before and I'm thankful for that, but you keep barging into my life and tell me all these cryptic things like I'm just supposed to know the answers. I get enough of that from Angelique, thank you very much. If it is answers that you seek, you only need to be honest with me, and yourself. The Harlequin stepped back, spreading its arms wide. But in this instance, we are willing and eager to speak clearly. Trust no one. Trust no. Twilight stopped herself. Oh no. You're not tricking me into being paranoid. My friends and I have been together for long enough. I think I'd know if they were going to betray me. You say that, and yet you refuse to tell them what you really are. The Eldar twisted its hands, and Twilight saw an image of her as a pony, only now dressed in her armor. They wouldn't believe me, Twilight countered. This Imperium, they're so caught up in hatred. I know my friends have gotten better, but... And you think I am sowing the seeds of paranoia? The Harlequin stepped back, seemingly fading into the shadows as it continued to speak. Remember, Twilight Maiden, trust no one. It'd be a whole lot easier to trust you if you didn't. Twilight stepped forward, but the Harlequin was gone. Just fade into the darkness all the time, she sighed, letting the tip of her sword drop to the ground as she waited for something else to jump out. Sensing nothing, Twilight put her sword away and hurried towards the exit of the training room, taking a moment to get her bearings before sprinting down a hallway. Matthias would have some answers. He was someone she could trust. As she ran down the hall, Twilight spotted Veronica and Ruth coming the other way. She skidded to a stop to avoid bowling over the two sisters, but they braced all the same. Tara, is something wrong? Ruth asked. Maybe? I don't know, Twilight started. Do you know where Matthias is? Lord Matthias is on the command bridge with Lady Olivier, Veronica replied. He actually sent us to come get you. Great. Sorry girls, but I'll take it from here. Twilight focused her energy, ignoring Veronica's follow-up before she teleported. She found herself on the bridge, the click of several gun safeties being switched off heralding her arrival. Oh, right. Hold, Sunset barked, her voice cool but not overly harsh. It is only the student. She is no threat to us. Twilight took a moment to let her eyes adjust before looking about. Sunset was there, clad in her red dress uniform with Matthias off to her left. She kept her vision on the display screen, though Matthias at least gave her a friendly nod as she approached. Matthias, Sunset, she whispered. How many times do I have to correct you, Tara? Sunset said, still not looking at her. And whatever it is will have to wait. We are just about to exit for our final approach to Macragge. Twilight paused. They were already so close to Macragge? Yes, it had been some time since they had left the patch of space where the Sanguinium martyrs had been stranded, but surely they would have had some advanced warning. Then again, I have been focusing on finding Celestia over pretty much everything else. Guess I just missed it. Oh, Twilight fidgeted for a moment. So is that why you called me up here? There are places even Inquisitors can't just flash a badge of office and waltz into, Matthias said. Sarai has a plan set in motion, but I wanted you here in the event that plan didn't play out as we had hoped. Wouldn't it be easier to ask Vulcan to do that? Twilight offered. As far as the Imperium is concerned, Vulcan is a mythological being that has been dead for 12,000 years, Sunset said, still not looking away from the screen. You, though, are practically a living saint from how often you've been seen at the Empress side. Unless we stand face to face with our potential opponents, your word will carry more weight than is at this time. I asked him to join the sisters in the hangar for when we make our landing. Twilight swallowed. While Solemnis had proved she could do well on her feet, dealing with such formalities remained an ever-daunting task. At least dealing with humans would be a little easier than dealing with aliens. She hoped. Before them, space contorted as the Sword of Redemption exited the warp. Twilight peeked around sunset, seeing a rocky world surrounded by two separate fleets of warships. Fortunately, none of them seemed to be moving to attack them, allowing the Inquisitor's ship to decelerate and move towards a neutral orbit. "Begin transmitting our access codes," Sunset said, turning her head slightly to speak with her crew. "I will deal with whatever challenges that may face us." "Yes, my lady," one of the officers replied. "Whom should we accept first if we are hailed by both fleets?" Twilight quirked an eyebrow at this. The Imperium seemed to value efficiency and deference to higher authorities, so why would there be a break in the command structure like that? Maybe it has to do with that schism everyone told me about. "Prioritize the Ultramarines first," Sunset continued, looking back to the monitor. "It seems only fitting, as it is their homeworld." "I imagine the Scions of Guilliman would argue that point," Matthias countered. "But it's your command. I'm sure you've had to deal with them enough already." "1 year of bureaucracy is quite enough, thank you," Sunset replied, her voice far more exasperated than normal. Twilight watched all this in silence, storing away whatever information might be useful for later. It would have been better if Matthias or Sunset had some more she could read on the topic, but it was too late to think on that now. "Guess I'll just have to improvise, again." Twilight was shaken from her thoughts by one of Sunset's officers calling out. "We are receiving a transmission from the leading battle barge," the woman said. "They are requesting we slow and identify. Maintain course, but open comms." Sunset replied, turning and moving past Twilight as she took a new spot in the center of the bridge. There was a pause before a new voice cut through the bridge. "This is the battle barge Resolute, Captain Acheron speaking," the voice said. "Adjust your course on the vector provided and identify yourself." "This is Emiliana Helos, transport ship Stargazer," Sunset replied. Twilight noticed that the other woman's demeanor had shifted considerably, her pose being far more open and her chin held higher. Twilight could even swear Sunset smiled. "I'm carrying a shipment F grain and pilgrims from Ajax and Connor. Per my orders I'm to maintain course and unload at the proper civilian channels." "I was not aware of a grain shipment," the other captain replied. "On whose authority do you bring these pilgrims?" "I wasn't aware that pilgrims were needing authority from anyone but the Empress herself," Sunset replied, crossing her hands behind her back as she continued. "But I'm not one to raise a fuss. Send in our manifest now." Sunset gave a slight nod, a few more officers moving to prepare the manifest. There was a pause, Twilight moving closer to Matthias as they waited. "They won't fire on us, will they?" she asked. "The Ultramarines and their successors don't make a habit of destroying transports on whims," Matthias replied. "But given the events of the last few years, I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them are a little paranoid and trigger-happy." Twilight frowned but said nothing more. Matthias and Sunset knew what they were doing, and surely they had plans in place in case they were fired upon. "Your manifest has been cleared," Captain Acheron replied. "You may maintain course and unload your cargo. Be advised, though your transmissions and movements will be tracked, so do not get any ideas and reach out to the Scions for assistance." "Wouldn't think of doing that, sir," Sunset replied, rocking on her feet as she continued. "Empress protect you." And with that the communication cut out, Sunset straightening out before looking at her officers. "Find a non-intrusive orbit and contact the main port. Monitor any other transmissions that might jeopardize our mission." "Yes, my lady." With that, Sunset cast her gaze over to Twilight and Matthias, the two getting the message and moving to join them. They started down the hall, Sunset pulling a pair of gloves from her coat pocket before speaking. "We're lucky he didn't order a full search of the ship," Sunset said. "My authority would have gotten them to back down, but then the rest of the Ultramarines would know we were coming." "Why not just tell them the truth?" Twilight asked. "And risk getting into a pissing contest over who gets to claim responsibility for helping the student of the Empress and Primarch Vulcan return to the Imperium? Better to keep them on the defensive and perhaps get it through their adamantium skulls that their jockeying is costing the Imperium time and lives it cannot afford to lose. Things aren't that bad, are they?" Both Inquisitors stopped and looked at Twilight. Under their scrutiny, Twilight found herself twiddling her thumbs in nervousness, waiting for them to respond. Matthias was the one who ultimately broke the silence. "Despite the strife, the Ultramarines, the Scions, and their allies are exemplars of the Astartes," he said. "They had great success against Hive Fleet Cetus and the Tau Empire in the years before the Empress' return. My father was also quite respectful towards them," Sunset added. "At the very least, they are willing to listen to reason. We just need to make sure it's on our terms rather than theirs." Our terms. The two inquisitors were about to depart when Twilight spoke again. The Eldar was here, Matthias, she blurted out. Matthias froze before turning to face her. What did it say? He asked, his voice low. Sunset paused as she regarded the two, though she did not say anything right away. Perhaps she merely wanted to see how things would play out. He said that I shouldn't trust anyone. Twilight started. Obviously I trust you, Vulcan, and the sisters, but that it would happen so close to Ultramar. Perhaps the Eldar have a stake in the success of our mission we don't yet realize, Sunset mused, bringing a hand to her chin. And guessing by your words, I'm guessing this isn't the first time you've had an encounter like this? Twilight blinked. Sunset had been around for long enough and she didn't know about the Eldar? The Xenos seemed to have a special interest in Twilight, Matthias said, moving on so they could reach the hangar. They call her the Twilight Maiden. Eldar mythology is not my strong suit, but I know enough to know there's no mention of any kind of entity with that name. It seems likely they know of Twilight's origins, though, Sunset offered. I have a few theories as to how they could have come across that information, none of them good, mind you. Please, the less I have to think about the Empress creating a world of benevolent horse Xenos the better. It's okay to call them ponies, Lord Velos, Sunset said, Twilight spotting the barest hint of a smile on the Lady Inquisitor's face. Regardless, the Eldar obviously seek to manipulate us into carrying out some action that will forward their plans for Twilight, Matthias continued. Seems like I'm going to be very busy dealing with them as well. As well? Twilight asked, jogging to get between the two Inquisitors. What's going on, and why aren't you telling me about this? Because your job is to find the Empress, Twilight, Sunset replied, her voice colder. We cannot afford you getting distracted by other matters we can handle on our own. But Sunset. Just because you call me that doesn't mean I'm going to change my mind, Sunset looked down at Twilight. You say you trust us, don't you? Trust us that we can handle these threats while you locate the Empress. Twilight hesitated, her mind going over a number of bad scenarios on how this could turn out. She needed to help, pick up the slack she'd left behind since Mirshan's death, but then, overworking herself would do no one any good. Okay. Twilight nodded. Just be careful. I don't want to lose anyone else I could have saved. Were the universe so kind, Twilight, Sunset replied, quickening her pace to reach the hangar. Matthias slowed, just enough to rest a hand on Twilight's shoulder. I know you're overthinking things right now, he said. But don't worry. While I don't trust her entirely, Sarai has the best idea of what we are facing right now. We'll keep things under control while you reach the Empress. I know, Twilight replied. And I'm sorry for getting all worked up, sometimes it feels like the only thing I'm actually good at. We'll get that sorted in due time. For now, we just need to focus on the present. Twilight nodded again, the two hurrying to catch up to Sunset. The three soon found themselves in the hangar, where the sisters, Matthias' henchman, and Vulcan were awaiting them near the lander. Sunset stopped long enough to trade out her normal coat for a heavier greatcoat, quickly moving down the stairs before speaking. I will be brief, my friends, she started, coming to a stop while the others formed a semicircle around her. We have just gotten clearance to land on Macragge. We will be landing at a civilian station several hours south of the Ultramarines' Fortress Monastery, so until I secure us access to the fortress I advise you stay close and follow my lead. When you say several hours, Ruth started. You mean by air, yes? Unless you want to spend the next 5 months marching Terra through frigid, mountainous terrain, then yes. Sunset replied. Ruth gave a disappointed frown. Oh, she mumbled. I was hoping that perhaps we could join the pilgrims in their walk to the shrine of Guilliman. There will be other opportunities for you to show your devotion, sister, Sunset looked to the rest of the group. For now, our priority is to make sure Terra is in a secure location where she can contact the Empress. Sunset then turned her attention to Vulcan. My lord, do you have any objections to our course? Though your words were a mite harsh, I agree that securing Miss Terra's safety is paramount to our success. The Primarch said. Good. I will be needing your assistance in securing passage to the fortress. If I may have a moment of your time, I would like to discuss the matter fully. Vulcan nodded, Sunset stepping around the others while the Primarch made room for her to get aboard the ship. As the other Inquisitor disappeared from sight, the sisters stepped up to speak with Twilight. It's good to see you're all right, Terra, Veronica said. When you teleported away from us so fast, I was worried that you might expose yourself to the warp or something horrible like that. Don't worry, Twilight shook her head. The Empress helped me a little with my teleports before we arrived on Rin's world, so I know when to avoid overtaxing myself. Oh, good. Perhaps once you are safe, we could take you to Guilliman's resting place, Ruth offered. With all that has gone on recently, I feel we have slacked in ensuring your spiritual growth continues. There will be a time and place for that, Ruth, Naomi said, Twilight feeling a slight shiver as the Sister Superior's gaze passed over her, helmet or no helmet. For now, we must make sure no further ill befalls Terra. Yes, Sister Naomi. Good. Go find your spots on board, girls. The four sisters nodded and made their way up the ramp, Naomi turning her attention towards Twilight. Is there anything more you need from us? Twilight hesitated. Something in Naomi's words and body language told her the Sister Superior was on edge, though with the multitude of threats that had come up she could barely guess as to what. I know they don't really trust Sunset, Twilight thought. But maybe, someday, they'll come around. No, not yet, Twilight said, shaking her head. I'd be lying if I said everything was fine, but we just have to make do with what we've got, right? I suppose so. Naomi nodded, her face invisible behind her helmet. With that the Sister Superior turned, disappearing into the hold of the lander as Twilight looked on. And just briefly, she thought she saw the image of the Harlequin's face among the shadows. For a man of his stature and fierce appearance, Vulcan was a pleasant conversationalist. Granted, Sarai had expected nothing less from the Primarch of the Salamanders. His sons were held as exemplars of kindness and selflessness among the Imperium, so it was only natural that their founder would be to them what they were to the Imperium. Seated before him, hearing him speak in soothing tones of his achievements and adventures, it was as if she was back with the Tanith, hearing the old veterans speak of their own trials on campaign. She noticed her eyes drifting to her wrists more often than not. I wish Father was here to see this. Twilight and the others were not so chatty on the ride down to Macragge. The sisters appeared focused on prayer, while Lord Velas and his henchmen spoke in hushed tones about the events before them. A part of her wanted to open up, perhaps chat again as she did in the days before she became a Lady Inquisitor, but the paranoia, the fear of exposing herself, that continued to hold her back. Perhaps this was something Lord Vulcan noticed as well, given how much he was willing to speak to her now. I saw the tattoos on your wrists, he said, jolting Sarai from her thoughts. May I ask where they come from? Oh, Sarai said, smoothing a wrinkle in her overcoat before speaking. It's best to say that I am an orphan. My father discovered me on some bombed-out world in the Gothic sector, and I was more or less adopted by him and his soldiers after that. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing the tattoos and the scars they were meant to cover. I managed to track down his regiment and paid a visit after I graduated from the Schola, before I was properly assigned to an Ordo Malleus Inquisitor. The Tanith were always kind to me, and thought that perhaps these would cover up my scars for a little while. They are quite beautiful, Vulcan said, taking Sarai's hand in his own as he inspected the tattoos further. It is a shame that one as young as you has had to go through so much torment. I wouldn't exactly call myself young, my lord. Sarai responded quickly. Please, call me Vulcan, the Primarch said, giving her a smile. Though my status would say otherwise, I do not care much for such grandiose titles. I understand, Sarai said. During your journeys did you ever see Tanith? I do not remember standing on a world of that name, Vulcan said, releasing Sarai's hand before continuing. So much has changed since I last walked this realm, I could not tell you what remains and what does not. Is Tanith a good world? It was, so I've been told, Sarai replied. It was destroyed millennia ago by the forces of chaos. Only a handful of guardsmen were able to escape the carnage, but they and their descendants have served the Imperium faithfully through many battles. Though they gained a new home and other Tanith regiments joined them, the first and only are still legends among the Imperial Guard, and I will always cherish them for saving my life. Good, Vulcan nodded. Remember the past and those that have brought you to the present, Miss Sarai. Much of the strife we see now is because men and women have forgotten that past and grasped blindly towards the future, and I would not wish to see that rot progress further than it already has. Sarai said nothing. Vulcan's perspective on what constituted rot and what did not would surely give any Imperial scholar a massive headache, but it was always refreshing to hear the perspective of a time long since past. And at least I need not dredge up my own sins. The transport rattled as it landed, Sarai waiting a moment longer before standing. Vulcan and I will speak with the officials at the dock, she said, the Primarch moving to join her as she addressed the others. Keep the engines idling, I don't expect this to take too long. Are you sure you don't need my help? Twilight asked. Sarai regarded the student for a moment. Yes, she could be of some use in negotiating their transit, but her talents would most likely be better spent when they got to their true challenge, getting the Ultramarines and the Scions of Guilliman to be quiet long enough for them to negotiate safe refuge. Don't worry, Terra, she replied. Vulcan and I will be all right out there. When you are needed, you will know. Twilight hesitated, but gave a short nod. The girl really does want to prove herself. Sarai turned towards the ramp, waiting as it lowered down and exposed them to the chill of Macragge. For all that was said of the gloriousness of Robute Guliman's homeworld, it did not endear itself as particularly hospitable. Sarai stepped out onto a worn tarmac, their transport joined by a number of civilian craft of all marks and sizes. Beyond, Sarai could see the snow-capped peaks of the Hera's Crown Mountains, the last natural defense before the ceramide and steel of the Ultramarines' fortress. At the base of the mountains Sarai could barely make out a few flickering lights, the starting point for the traditional pilgrimage into the mountains to gaze upon Guliman's resting place. To her left was more barren landscape, while to her right Sarai could see the usual trappings of civilization, farms and row houses giving way to the massive skyscrapers and municipal buildings that the majority of Macragge's civilians called home. The landing zone was busy with activity. Servitors and laborers worked quickly to unload transports, stacking up food and supplies in neat piles beneath the shadows of their carriers. Pilgrims were among the most numerous groups, with Sarai seeing dozens of small enclaves following mini-storm priests on their way towards the mountains. The air was abuzz with the sound of clanking machinery and ship engines, but even the sounds of machines could do little to drown out the hum of mankind's devotion and commitment to moving onward. Sarai figured there was something poetic in that assessment, but she was too cold to think on it much. Sarai adjusted her coat as Vulcan squeezed out of the lander. "It has been some time since I have stood upon Macragge," the Primarch said, straightening out as he surveyed the land. "I see it hasn't changed much since then." "I suppose that is for the best," Sarai replied. "Ultramar has been a frequent target for mankind's enemies in the last 5,000 years. I suppose we should all be thankful that it has withstood the onslaught." "Indeed," Vulcan said, finishing his survey of the terrain. "Well, we must not keep our contacts waiting, no?" Sarai nodded, starting off across the tarmac with Vulcan following close behind. She did her best to keep her gaze forward, but she could feel a shift in the air as she and the Primarch made their way through the crowds. Some of the pilgrim groups even began to form up behind them as the reality of what they saw befell them, hushed whispers reaching Sarai's ears and mind as she walked. Even with her headband in place, it was difficult to keep all of their thoughts out of mind. Fortunately, relief came as Sarai spotted a finely dressed man flanked by a squad of guards dressed in royal blue and gold armor. Sarai stopped as the man approached, two cherubs fluttering up to hand him a scroll. "May I have your identification, please?" the man said, producing a pen as he continued. "I do not wish there to be any more disturbances at this port." "Understandable, my friend," Sarai said, reaching into her pocket to produce her symbol of office. "Lady Sarai Olivier of the Ordo Malleus. I am transporting Primarch Vulcan of the Salamanders and the Empress' personal student, Lady Terra, to the Ultramarines and require authorization of my transit. If there is anything I might offer," Vulcan added. "Please, speak now." This drew another wave of murmurs through the crowd that had gathered, some singing praises to the Empress for the great fortune of seeing a Primarch in the flesh. "I," the man said, trying and failing to regain his composure as he rifled through his scroll. "I received no notification that you were present in Ultramar, Miss Olivier." "Lady Olivier, please," Sarai countered. "Let's do our best to maintain proper titles, now. How soon can you grant authorization for us to continue our journey? I would need to make the proper communications." "Then do so. My mission is of utmost importance to the Imperium, and I cannot be delayed any further than I already have been." The man sputtered, but said nothing more as he jotted down a note in the scroll and passed it off to the nearest cherub. As he moved away through the crowd, Vulcan leaned down to speak with Sarai. "There is no need to be so harsh, Miss Sarai," he said. "It may give the crowds the wrong idea concerning yourself and Miss Terra." "I am an inquisitor," Sarai replied. "It is not my business to be liked, only to make sure the Imperium is secure. Terra can be shielded for a time, and when that time is past she can show the galaxy that its hope is in the right hands. But you are assigned to her, and Terra cannot be everywhere at once. What will others think of her and the path the Imperium is on if you act in such a contrary way?" Sarai said nothing. Speaking politics with a Primarch would be a battle she could not win, no matter how hard she tried. Better to leave Vulcan thinking things over than to get into a detrimental discussion. But then, words such as these do tend to linger. By now Sarai could see the man from before approaching, his guards and cherubs following behind. "Apologies," the man said. "But the Ultramarines are denying access to all non-Astartes craft until further notice." "I'm sorry?" Sarai asked. "Did you not hear that I am traveling with a Primarch and the Empress' personal student? The Ultramarines are refusing all craft, regardless of claimed authority," the man said. "If you wish to speak with them, there is a 6-month delay before transportation can be authorized, and a 5-month queue for transitions. You would make the Empress student and a Primarch wait a year before they can seek an audience? I am sorry, but the Ultramarines are insistent." Any outside aircraft could be construed as a direct threat against the chapter, and until further notice all travel is to be restricted to ground paths. Sarai's hands tightened. Dealing bureaucracy was just another part of living in the Imperium, but times like this were she not committed to avoiding the mistakes of the past, the man in front of Sarai would have his mind flayed and the request properly processed within the hour. She wanted to say more to plead her case before a heavy hand fell on her shoulder. "I sense your anger," Vulcan said. "Perhaps you would permit me to take command here." Sarai released the tension in her hands, looking up at the Primarch as he gave her a reassuring smile. She nodded, stepping back while the Primarch approached the man. "Excuse me, but I do not believe I learned your name." My name?" The man stammered. "Why would you care for something so trivial, my lord? A name is not a trivial thing, my friend," Vulcan said, gently pushing aside a cherub so he could stand next to the man. "And I have been away from the Imperium for so long, so it would help me acclimate to living among mankind once more. So please, your name?" "Lucian, my lord," the man said. "A fine name, if I do say so myself." Vulcan guided Lucian back towards the way he had originally come, his guards parting to allow the Primarch through. Unwilling to just stand idle while Vulcan wandered off, Sarai quickened her pace to keep up behind the group. "You have worked within this port for some time, have you not? Perhaps a decade or so as a senior magistrate." "I see. It takes great dedication to commit to such a position for so long, my friend Lucian. I am an artisan of the forge, you see, and being able to commit oneself to a singular project is a mark of a master, and those that achieve such mastery are well deserving of their rank and respect." Thank you, Lord Vulcan." The man smoothed out a wrinkle in his robes before continuing. "I do try my best to work hard and perhaps stand out amongst the rabble." "Ah, but you are not flaunting your position as some would. Therefore, you are truly deserving of your status as a man of character." Sarai was not sure if Vulcan was being generous in order to sway Lucian into authorizing their departure, or if he was being truly complimentary. "I guess I am already close to being far gone if I have to ask that of Vulcan." By now a large throng of pilgrims and workers had formed up behind them, their murmurs and blessings reaching Sarai's ears and causing her head to tingle. Her headband could hold off most of the errant thoughts of the masses, but there was still a chance one or two might get her to slip up. "Now, is this your communication station?" Sarai shifted her thoughts. They had stopped outside a large building flanked by a number of men dressed similarly to Lucian's guards. Vulcan regarded the structure for a moment before chuckling. "A mite small for me, but then I am no stranger to hardships. Come, friend, show me the way so I may speak with the Ultramarines myself." The Primarch looked down at Sarai. "Miss Sarai, perhaps you might stay here for now?" "Lord Vulcan," Sarai started. "I think it would be best if I accompany you for the negotiations." "No, I think I can handle myself in this," he said, giving her a smile. "Stay here, speak with the people perhaps. I think it would do you a world of good when it comes time to speak with Miss Terra again. And I thought Twilight was bad." Sarai opened her mouth to object, but Vulcan had ushered the magistrate and his men inside and left Sarai with the crowd. She paused, turning to face the masses of hopeful pilgrims and curious soldiers that surrounded her. In a way she felt exposed, like when she had first been brought off the black ships and left to the mercy of the Inquisition and their trainers. "I will not fade. I will not run as I did before Celestia. If you have any questions," she said, "please be orderly about presenting them. Unlike Her Majesty, I lack the knowledge and patience to address you all at once. Then perhaps you would care to speak to one representative of her servants?" Sarai turned slightly to see a woman stepping out of the crowd. She was a regal sort, dressed in black armor and white robes adorned with a black chalice. On her left hip appeared to be an ornate rod of some kind, while a sword and pistol were clamped to her right. She wore a hood, though Sarai could see a few locks of silver hair poking out from beneath as the woman drew closer. Moreover, Sarai saw an opportunity. "Apologies, my lady," she said, turning and giving a slight bow to the newcomer before continuing. "I did not see you among the crowds here. It is not proper for a servant of the Empress to draw too much attention to herself, lest she succumb to pride and arrogance." The woman said, returning the bow before offering a hand. "Anna Maria Teresa of the Order of the Ebon Chalice. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Lady Sarai." "Likewise," Sarai replied, taking the sister's hand and giving it a shake. "I am surprised to see that there are other members of the Adepta Sororitas here. My preceptory was passing through on our way north, to cleanse a world of heretics that still pledge themselves to abominable Xenos," Sister Teresa explained. "I thought that a visit to Guliman's shrine might help inspire some of our newer sisters to greater heights of their faith. A noble cause if I may say so, so she holds some rank, then I can leverage this well enough. But then, I am surprised to see you here instead of up at the shrine. At this, Teresa frowned. Half of my sisters have been stationed there for a month due to these damned politics, she grumbled. I tell myself this is all to test their resolve and their faith, but those of us down here are getting restless. I had hoped this magistrate could allow me to speak with the Ultramarines to speed up their return, but I suppose your needs outweigh mine in this regard. If things are as serious as I am hearing, I would think the Ultramarines would like that as well, Sarai continued. But perhaps it is the Empress doing that we were able to meet in such circumstances, no? Once Lord Vulcan has granted access, I will see what I can do about getting your sisters back to your care. Will you? For the briefest of moments the regal demeanor Teresa carried disappeared, but not for so long to be noticeable by anyone but Sarai. Perhaps it was merely her powers playing tricks, again. That would be wonderful, Lady Sarai. Truly, your presence has been a miracle direct from the Empress herself. I wouldn't go so far as to say that Sarai started, but Teresa could not be dissuaded. You returned one of the Empress' blessed sons and you served the student. If you do not consider yourself blessed by her hand, then perhaps you need to spend more time in prayer. Teresa paused. Another favor, perhaps I could meet the student. I have heard only rumors and hearsay concerning this woman that I would like to put to rest. Even a number of my fellow canonesses think she doesn't actually exist. Oh no, she's real. Unfortunately for my intended path to redemption. And I am sure she would love to speak with you, time permitting. You do me a great honor, Lady Olivier, Teresa said, allowing herself a smile. I must say, perhaps this delay truly is a blessing from Her Majesty. That my preceptory would be in the place and time to witness a Primarch's return and speak with the right hand of the Empress herself. She paused before letting out a short chuckle. Oh, look at me now. I am like a novice set before her trainers for the first time. I am sure many of us will be like that in the days and months to come. Sarai replied. It was more diplomatic than saying some would feel more like the prisoner standing before the executioner's block. I am sure. Tell me, Lady Sarai, how did you come into the student's service? The Empress asked me to find her after she had been lost to the warp. This drew a short nod from Teresa, allowing Sarai to continue. When I found her, she had already recovered Primarch Vulcan, which honestly surprised me when I saw it. I'm a veteran of many wars, and even I would be stunned by that, I suppose, Teresa replied. This student gets more and more fascinating with every detail. Just then, the door behind the two opened, Vulcan stepping out with a rather stunned-looking Lucian following behind him. Good news, my friend, he said, beaming down at Sarai. I have just finished speaking with the Ultramarines, and they have agreed to allow us passage to their fortress. Really? Sarai asked. That did not take too long. The people of Ultramar must be proud that they have such efficient magistrates to run their daily lives, Vulcan said, now directing his attention to Teresa. And you? What is your name? Teresa, my lord, the canoness stammered, now resembling a scolded child more than a proud warrior of the Empress. I am in command of a preceptory of sisters escorting pilgrims to the shrine. I see. Sarai could sense some of Vulcan's cheer chilling, but not by much. I suppose you wish to meet Miss Terra, then? Your fellows seem to hold her in a much greater esteem than even I do. Fellows, my lord? The student travels with a squadron of Sisters of the Martyred Lady, Sarai explained. I am of the Ordo Malleus, so the exact division of your orders is not my strong suit, but I imagine they would love to speak with you as well. Oh, of course. Teresa nodded, though Sarai could detect a small hint of disappointment. Jealousy? Well, I shall speak briefly, and then I will let you be on your way. We are not in such a rush, Miss Teresa, Vulcan said. I managed to convince the Ultramarines to drop their silly restrictions, but not until tomorrow. I suppose there is only so much preparation they can carry out before our arrival. I am sure you will have plenty of time to speak with Miss Terra and her friends. Oh, the canoness fidgeted for a moment. Then perhaps you could escort me to the student, that I may offer a formal invitation to her and her companions to join my preceptory for our evening meal. That sounds perfect to me, Sarai said, giving a warm smile to the canoness and the Primarch. I am sure Terra would be delighted to speak with you and your sisters. Of course Twilight would, but then there were always more opportunities to be had in conversation with one of similar rank. Then it's settled, Vulcan said. You two can go on ahead, though. I think there are a few things I would like to deal with first. Sarai quirked an eyebrow at this, before following Vulcan's gaze to the huddled masses surrounding them. He really is too good for the Imperium. As you command, Lord Vulcan, Sarai replied, giving a short nod before she turned to Teresa. Canoness, if you would come with me. Of course, Teresa nodded, falling in step behind Sarai as she made her way through the crowd. As they moved, Sarai cast a glance back to Vulcan, watching as the Primarch stepped forward and knelt to speak with those around him. She could not hear what they were saying, but the Primarch's smile was unmistakable. He was more than happy to be there, and ready to heal the souls of those that approached him. And in a way, it was all thanks to Twilight that he had that chance. Sunset Shimmer would never have achieved that. She truly is worthy of being Celestia's student. Lady Olivier? Sarai shook her head and looked back to Teresa. I'm sorry, but you seem distracted. Oh, just thinking of some matters, Sarai replied. Did you wish to ask me something? I was going to ask what kind of woman this Terra, was it? What kind of woman is she? Terra is. Sarai paused, trying to think of the right thing to say. Terra is a bit sheltered, for lack of a better term. I'm sure others have called her trusting and even naive, but there is an earnestness to her being that I feel defies such labels. I see. The canoness nodded. From the rumors I heard, the image in my mind was of something closer to the Empress herself, a powerful figure that calmed hearts and banished the wicked with a word. Really? Rin's world is long in the past, but news travels, Teresa replied. From what I have heard, the student even has a small cult on that planet dedicated to her. Apparently, they call her the Twilight Maiden. Sarai froze, Teresa almost tripping over her as she came to a stop. That was the same name Velas said the Eldar attributed to her. How would the Rinites know of it? Sarai was not so well acquainted with the manipulations of Xenos, but killing their gods was always a duty of the Ordo Malia. Surely something like this would have come up. How could I be so blind? Inquisitor? Teresa asked. Is something the matter? No, Sarai said, shaking her head. Just a few other thoughts. I can explain later, after you have met the student. Oh, if you say so. Chapter 3.12, Questioning. Twilight was among the first to get ready for the meeting with the Ebon Chalice. It had been a surprise when Sunset had returned without Vulcan and with the canoness in tow, but Teresa seemed perfectly personable and even a bit excited to face Twilight. Not wanting to be rude, and perhaps give her a chance to learn more about Macragge and the people therein, Twilight had accepted and made sure the invitation was extended to as many of her friends as possible. That was all well and good, though given how Naomi had been glaring quite intensely at Sunset once Teresa left, there was more at stake than a simple dinner. Twilight had found a spot near the top of the loading ramp to wait, leaning against the hull of the ship as she watched the sun set on Macragge. The sun caught the edge of the mountains, casting long shadows across the spaceport that danced with every slight motion. Far in the distance, Twilight thought she could make out the flickering light of fires against the darkened cliffs. A cool wind had swept down from the mountains, Twilight pulling her arms close to her chest to try and save off the cold. All she had for now was time to think. Even the arrival of someone behind her couldn't shake her from that. It is not too late to back out, you know? Matthias said, leaning against the other side of the entry. No, that'd just look poorly on me, Twilight said, shaking her head and looking at Matthias. I just feel out of practice, but I guess you already knew that. I've traveled with you for over 3 years. I like to think I know you pretty well. Twilight let out a small laugh at this, looking back out at Macragge as Matthias continued. And not to put more pressure on you, but I imagine this will be far less daunting than facing the Ultramarines tomorrow. If I can survive a Primarch threatening to kill us all and evil robots, I'm sure a haul of Space Marines shouldn't be too difficult, Twilight said, hesitating as she tried to think of the right thing to say next. But these new sisters, though circumstances allowed Naomi and her girls to open up to me rather quickly, but I'm not sure if I enjoy the idea of being put back on a pedestal of worship. I see. A pause before Matthias spoke again. For what it's worth, I do not see you as an object of worship. Careful, someone around here will probably accuse you of heresy for that. Perhaps a bit harsher than she intended, but Matthias wasn't going to get too hung up over such things. Not now, anyway. Your status as a student does affect things, but at the end of the day you're just a woman, no? Twilight looked back to Matthias as he continued. Even when the Empress revealed herself, that never really changed in my mind. I've seen you grow stronger in your convictions, your courage, but the idea of seeing you as a divine figure in the way the Empress is just, well, it doesn't sit well with me. It's something I've thought about as well. Twilight's gaze softened. At times it makes me wonder if Celestia made a mistake bringing me here. Maybe Luna would have been a better fit for the task. A pause, Matthias waiting for Twilight to go on. She's basically everything those people out there think I am. Composed, regal, strong. They're a lot alike, though I suppose Luna's the more reserved and calculating of the two. Matthias furrowed his brow, as if the idea of someone being more calculating than Celestia was too much for him to wrap his head around. After a moment, he shrugged and continued. If it helps, it seems clear the Empress had a reason for choosing you, Matthias offered. I don't know your other princess, But ask yourself if she would have been able to do all that you've done here. Would she have been able to draw out the elements like you have? I don't know, Twilight sighed, looking back to the landscape. Maybe not. Luna took some time to make new friends after she returned, but I like to think she was making an improvement. A pause. Whether or not that would be enough to draw out the elements, I don't know. I'm not even sure if she would need them to help the Empress confront the Dark God. The Imperium needs them more than just as a weapon to slay a god, Twilight, Matthias countered. Think of the hundreds of lives Rebecca has saved with her Narthecium, or how Judith brought you back from despair. Twilight said nothing more as Matthias continued. As odd as it is for me to say this, perhaps you need to stop thinking like a soldier of the Imperium in this regard and start thinking as one of your equestrians again. Maybe, Twilight said, looking back to Matthias. It's been so long since I've had a moment's peace. Maybe once the Empress returns, I can ask for just a little time to myself to recover what I lost. What would you even do then? Probably study. It's always helped me before. Matthias let out a small snort at this, but said nothing more before Twilight spotted Sunset coming out of the dark, followed by Naomi and her sisters, the Sister Superior having traded her helmet for a hooded cloak and what appeared to be bandages on her face. I believe we are prepared, Lord Velos, Sunset said, adjusting her sleeve before stepping past Matthias. We best not keep the Ebon Chalice waiting. No, of course not. Matthias replied, allowing the Ordo Malleus Inquisitor to pass before looking to the sisters. If you would rather guard the lander, it's not too late to back down. We will not back down from our duties to protect Terra, Lord Matthias, Naomi replied, her voice more curt than usual. Even if it means I must once more hide in shame. Twilight saw Ruth bristle at this. She had heard the younger sister speaking at length with Naomi about her scars, but it appeared that the Sister Superior had won that particular argument. I can always talk with her later about it, if she wants to, Twilight thought. Then we best be off. The two Inquisitors took point, Twilight falling back to allow Naomi's sisters to escort her. The tarmac was far less busy than it had been when they first landed, only a scattering of servitors and workers still up and about prepping ships for transit. There were still pilgrims to be seen, some having set up small tents and lean-tos wherever they could. Perhaps they were waiting in the hopes Vulcan would grace their presence, or perhaps they were hoping to get a glance of the mysterious student as she wandered among them. Or perhaps they were merely the poor and destitute that got left behind by the others. There were always some among mankind. Twilight looked down, furrowing her brow as a thought came to mind. She was familiar with the practices of the Order of Our Martyred Lady, but there had been surprisingly little on the Ebon Chalice anywhere she looked, even aboard Celestia's flagship. I suppose I'll just have to ask around then. Sister Naomi? She asked. Do you know a lot about the Ebon Chalice? I've fought alongside some of their prefectories in the past, Naomi replied, her voice still curt. The Ebon Chalice are traditionalists, though not as prone to zealotry as we of the Martyred Lady. Every strategy, battle plan, and prayer is as close to the teachings of Alicia Dominica as one can possibly get without raising the saint herself, and they are trusted as bastions of the faith and true emissaries from Terra. Oh. Twilight looked up. I'm surprised I didn't see them when the Empress revealed herself. I am certain some must have sought an audience with her while you were busy with other matters, the Sister Superior replied. But I am afraid that is all I can tell you about them. Our meetings were brief and our traditions divergent. I am sure that we have far less in common than you would like to think. Twilight traced Naomi's gaze to the back of Sunset's head. What was it between the two of them that had gotten Naomi so worked up? Maybe it has to do with whatever her and Matthias are dealing with. I think it would be a welcome moment for Terra, though, Ruth said from behind the Sister Superior, drawing Twilight's attention back to the girls. Yes, their traditions differ from ours, but it would not harm her to learn more of the faith from other servants of the Empress. While I am sure they wouldn't intend to do so, they may also draw Terra to other paths that would impede our duty to protect her. If I may be so bold, Sister, Sunset said, keeping her gaze forward. You are perhaps overthinking these things. The Sisters of the Ebon Chalice mean well in all they do, and I did not detect any signs of hostility from Lady Teresa during the time I spoke with her. Perhaps it is you who are being drawn to other paths that impede your duty to protect Terra. Twilight could hear Naomi's armor grinding against the grip of her combi flamer, but said nothing more. Whatever was going on between the two would have to be addressed head-on, though at a later time so the other sisters and Matthias weren't adversely affected. Not exactly the best for building friendships, but it was better than letting the two hate each other. Ahead, Twilight could see the first buildings ringing the tarmac. Most were small row houses for pilgrims and workers, but the one they were headed towards was a larger facility topped with a statue of some fallen ultramarine hero. Before the stairs leading to the main entrance stood a squad of Ebon Chalice sisters armed with shields and maces, another sister standing before them. Matthias fell back to join Twilight while Sunset took point. The leading sister gave a short bow of respect as the Inquisitor approached. "Welcome," the sister said. "I am Sister Palatine Alicia, and may I be the first to welcome you to our sanctuary. It is a pleasure to meet you." Sunset turned to her left to introduce the others. "This is Lord Matthias Velas of the Ordo Xenos, Sister Naomi and her sisters of the Martyred Lady, and of course the Empress student Terra." Twilight blinked a few times before stepping past the sisters, giving the Sister Palatine a nod. "Hello," she said, her voice wobbling but otherwise polite. "Thank you for inviting us here." "Of course," Alicia replied. Twilight noticed the sister's voice wobbled too. Was she nervous to be standing before her? "That's going to make this interesting, isn't it? If you would please follow me, I will be escorting you to the dining halls." With that the other sisters parted, allowing the party to move inside. The interior of the building was well decorated, frescoes of heroes and saints Twilight couldn't quickly identify looming over them as they walked. A number of serfs and pilgrims moved about the halls, most stopping and doing their best to change their routes when they spotted the group. "Odd," she heard Veronica say from behind. "The attendants on Palisades were never this jumpy around us." "These are tense times," Rebecca replied. "And this is a different order. Perhaps they are just unsure how to act around us." "As you can see," Alicia said from up front, focusing her attention on Twilight above all others. "We are doing the best we can with so little on account of so many sisters being stuck at the shrine of Guilliman. The help we get around here is welcome, but can be somewhat lacking at times." "Why?" Twilight asked. "Well, many of these poor souls have not yet grasped the proper procedures for serving the Empress," Alicia explained, drawing a confused look from Twilight. "I am sure you know all about such matters, being her personal student and all." "I've always tried to be friendly and open with those around me," Twilight replied. "I'd rather not have too many people fussing over me." "I would not describe it as fussing," Alicia replied, though now it was her turn to look confused instead of Twilight. "Do they just expect people to fuss over dignitaries? Come, though. Teresa has said much about your arrival, and we are all eager to hear your wisdom." Twilight tried to keep her shoulders from slumping in frustration. Just once, could someone not try and place her on a pedestal and expect her to be some high and mighty saint? Well, maybe it's better than the lion thinking I'm a waste of space. They rounded another corner and appeared to be approaching a set of ornate doors, the golden aquila set on them shimmering in the evening light. Alicia stopped before turning to the group. "Canoness Teresa and her inner circle are just beyond. I must ask that your escorts follow me to the dining hall set aside for the sisters inferior." "Huh?" Twilight asked, her hands tightening. "But the sisters and I have always been together. Why split us up? I understand that your fellows have different traditions." Alicia replied. "But as guests of the Ebon Chalice, I must ask that you allow for our own method of doing things. Rest assured, you all will be quite safe here. But wouldn't you want your lower-ranked sisters close to the higher-ranked ones, to better glean from their teachings and experience?" Alicia seemed to fidget at Twilight's question. Odd, that a mid-ranking sister of a well-established order would be so nervous. "Our order maintains the tradition of the ranks being separated, so that information that is not for prying ears does not get passed freely. Wouldn't that just create more distrust between the officers and the other sisters?" Twilight asked, stopping when Sunset spoke up. "Terra, we are guests here," the Inquisitor said. "It would be a mite rude to judge others solely by their traditions, given that we do not fully understand them. Besides, it is only for the night. They are not asking you to change for the rest of your life." Twilight hesitated, her eyes darting between Sunset and Alicia. It was just for one night, but after everything that happened and being surrounded by sisters she did not know. "No, that's what the old me would have thought. I need to step up more. Don't worry girls, I'll make up for this later," she said looking to the sisters. "There is nothing to worry about Terra," Naomi replied, her voice controlled. "If you need our services, you will know where to find us. Now go, you mustn't keep the canoness waiting." Twilight gave a hesitant nod, looking to Matthias for a moment before turning back to the Palatine. The Inquisitor said nothing, but he did give Twilight a reassuring nod once they made eye contact. Satisfied, Twilight looked back to Alicia, the Palatine giving a small smile. "You may proceed. Another sister inside will announce your presence. Your guards will follow me." Twilight nodded again, stepping around Alicia and opening the door behind the Palatine with Matthias and Sunset following behind. Matthias fell back to whisper something to Sunset, but Twilight remained focused on the door ahead. Another pair of sisters stood guard, one stepping forward as Twilight and the Inquisitors drew near. "You will leave all weapons you have brought with me," the sister said. Once that is complete, you may proceed to the hall. Twilight nodded, stepping aside as Matthias removed his bolt pistol and handed it to the sister. That task complete, the sisters stepped aside and ushered Twilight and the others inside, Twilight getting her first glimpse of the leadership of the Ebon Chalice. A crescent-shaped table lay before them, with Canoness Teresa and 5 other sisters seated around the table. The chair at the head of the table was empty, along with 2 more at its right which Twilight guessed was for Sunset and Matthias. To the side was an array of attendants, all keeping their heads low as the 3 approached, a flock of cherubs passing incense over the proceedings. Teresa rose as Twilight neared the central point of the crescent and spoke. "Welcome, student of the Empress," she said. "I trust the rest of your time on Macragge has not been too tiring." "No, but it's a little cold out there," Twilight replied. "After all the places I've been, it's quite a shift, to be honest." The assembled sisters of the Ebon Chalice seemed confused by Twilight's exchange, though Teresa seemed to recover faster than the others. Well, I suppose there is no avoiding that," she said before looking to her compatriots. "But I speak for all of my assembled sisters when I say we are proud to have you here with us tonight. Please, take a seat, and we can begin." Twilight nodded, making her way around the table towards the empty chairs, Teresa pulling out the central chair for Twilight to sit. Sunset stopped at the empty chair furthest from Twilight, ushering Matthias forward so he sat between the 2 women. "Normally among our prefectory," Teresa started, "the ranking member among our gathering will say a blessing before our meal, but as you are such an esteemed guest I would ask to do the honor myself." "Oh, of course," Twilight said, her shoulders relaxing before she continued. "Whatever you feel is best." Teresa nodded, taking the rosarios around her neck in a hand and turning towards some point in the room. Twilight traced her gaze to see what she was looking for, but guessed she was merely visualizing Celestia standing before her. Sunset appeared disinterested, while Matthias rested his chin on his hands as Teresa spoke. "Most blessed and glorious Empress," Teresa said, her words breathy as if Celestia herself had just appeared. "We thank thee, that your glorious student Terra has been delivered safely into our care. May all the saints that have guided her to our side be praised, for their wisdom and your blessing has not wandered far from her sight. Glorious Empress, it is truly wonderful that you have brought her here, and all of us lowly sisters are blessed that you would grant us this great honor in guiding and protecting her on her great quest. I really don't need more protectors." Twilight thought. It seemed like that would be the end of it, but Teresa seemed to have more to say. "Most gracious Empress, we thank thee that a bountiful harvest has been given to us today. Bless this food, O Master of Humanity, that it may nourish us and our most honored guests, as it has sustained all who seek your light. Gracious Empress, be with us if not in body then in spirit, for your wisdom outshines all that have come in this present era." With that she made the sign of the Aquila, taking her seat before signaling for the attendants to come and start serving. Twilight blinked, mulling over what she had just seen compared to what she had been used to with Naomi and her sisters. Sure, the sentiment was the same, but it seemed wordier than necessary. "I do hope you approve of the blessing and the food presented, young Terra," Teresa said, looking to Twilight as a serving of greens was set before them. "I do my best to make sure my sisters and I eat well, but I made sure that the best was prepared for your arrival." "Oh, thank you," Twilight gave a polite nod, but she did notice her left hand tightening for just a moment. "You really didn't need to do all this for me, though." "Nonsense. You are the Empress chosen, and after all that you have been through to arrive here on Ultramar I am sure you would appreciate some fresh food from Ajax." "Well, yes." Twilight took up her fork, poking a few leaves before taking a tentative bite. Biting into the greens was perhaps the freshest bite of food she had had, and Twilight's soul dropped as she stretched her mind back, and yet she could not find a point after she had arrived in this universe that matched the taste and texture of what she ate today. I suppose she really does care about all her sisters. "Ah, but we have other times to speak of food," Teresa continued, jolting Twilight back to the present. "What of your travels with the Empress? Perhaps there is some wisdom you have gleaned from her that you would be willing to share with the likes of us." "What kind of wisdom were you hoping for?" Twilight asked, one eyebrow raised in confusion. "I mean, I don't want to say something that might offend you in some way." "Anything from the Empress student could not be of offense to us," Teresa said quickly. "I for one would like to hear of your exploits on Rin's world," one of the sisters seated next to Teresa said. "To fight alongside the forces of 2 Primarchs against an enemy like the Tyranids is truly a great honor." "I didn't really do much fighting, to be honest," Twilight said, taking another bite of food to ease up her anxieties. "Maybe a little at the end, but compared to what some others went through I was practically a nonentity." The Empress had tasked her with finding a means of safeguarding the civilians of Rin's world, Matthias offered from his spot. The sisters seemed more focused on Twilight than the Inquisitors, though. From what some of the reports have said, you stood alone against a horde of warp spawn to protect the defenders of Rin's world, a third sister added. Truly, an inspired feat worthy of the saints of old. Tell me, what drew you to perform such an act of defiance against the great enemy? I just did what I'm sure anyone else would have done if they were in my position, Twilight replied, her voice noticeably sharper. I'm no one special, really just a girl who wants to see the Imperium lifted higher than it was before. This did seem to silence the sisters for a moment, and Twilight could hear Matthias shifting in his seat next to her. Sunset remained quiet, though perhaps she was distracted by something else in the hall. That is perhaps one way to look at things, young Teresa said, signaling to one of the attendants to continue serving. And your modesty is admirable, a rare sight in the Imperium these days. Oh, Twilight paused, staring back down at her food once more. Thank you. How did you come into the Empress service to begin with? The second sister asked. Perhaps it was divine countenance that drew you to her? I admit, I am intrigued as to a young woman such as you would be called into a position not even the greatest of saints has ever held. The Empress Twilight stopped herself for a moment. Speaking truthfully about how Celestia saw a spark of greatness within her would probably go over well with the Ebon Chalice, but then it was equally likely to bring out more questions about divine inspiration and providence. Would that cause them to raise her up more, leave her isolated from the others of the convent? No. They might raise you up, but you're still Twilight. The Empress needed my help, and I accepted it, Twilight replied finally. Had anyone else been in my position, I am sure they would have accepted the same. So she just asked you to help her? The third sister started. Was there no great revelation? No moment of clarity? Clarity, maybe. Sometimes the Empress works best in subtle ways rather than in grandiose displays of power. For you to remain so humble is a task I am sure many in the Imperium would struggle with, Teresa continued, taking a drink of wine as she spoke. And still, you step forward to take on such great tasks in her name, saving Rin's world and then coming to bring your wisdom to Ultramar. Perhaps these are tasks that we might be able to assist you with in the future. What do you mean? Twilight asked, looking at Teresa. Well, I am not one to be intrusive, Teresa said. But after all you have traveled through, you cannot think that only one squadron of battle sisters and 2 inquisitors are enough for you to effectively execute the Empress will, can you? Twilight paused, her nervousness welling up for a brief moment. I'm not quite sure what you want from me. I just offer a proposal, Teresa shifted in her seat before continuing. My sisters and I will be here within Ultramar for a few months more, long enough for each sister to make the pilgrimage to Guilliman's resting place. Once we are finished, I would like for us to join you on your mission, wherever that may be. A quick word with my superiors, and you will have a prefecture of the Ebon Chalice at your command. Teresa smiled. I am quite certain with more strength, whatever plan you have set in store will be. No. Teresa blinked in surprise at the swiftness of Twilight's response. The canoness faltered, but made an effort to recover. I'm sorry? She said. If there is something wrong with my prefectory, please tell me, so that it may be rectified. There's nothing wrong with your sisters, Twilight said, taking a drink as she continued. It's just that I do not need more protection. Matthias, Sarai, and my friends are all the help I need right now, and are all that I am comfortable with right now. Give it a few months, and I am sure you will change your mind. Just think of all you could accomplish. I am not a general, Twilight said, her voice more forceful than before. I did well enough on Rin's world, maybe, but I find I work best in smaller groups where I don't have the fate of thousands weighing on my mind. Right now I am not the kind of person you think I am, so please, believe me when I say I mean no disrespect, but I do not want your prefectory in my service. Silence reigned in the hall for a minute, the sisters looking to one another while Matthias cast a glance over to Sunset. Twilight turned her focus to her food, hoping that appearing disinterested would end the discussion and allow her to move on. After almost a minute of silence, this approach seemed to work. Well, I suppose that is fair, Teresa said, giving a disappointed huff. But perhaps you may change your mind in due time. I meant no offense by my offer. I know, Twilight relaxed, a smile gracing her lips once more. And I do appreciate the sentiment. I do my best work with others at my side, and without Naomi, her sisters, Matthias, and Sarai I doubt I would have made it to where I am now. I mean, we even found a few relics that I think might help the Imperium greatly, and I certainly couldn't have done that on my own. Relics, you say? The sister to Sunset's left asked. Your mission must truly be blessed. What kind of relics, if I may ask? Twilight gave a mental sigh of relief as she looked to the other sister. These sorts of things, she could feel comfortable talking about. Well, I have a theory, she started, shifting so she could face the sister fully. This woman was older, her face lined and stern, but there was a warmth in her eyes that reminded Twilight of some of her talks with Mayor Mare. Or Celestia. See, on my homeworld there were stories of 6 powerful relics that would manifest in a time of great need. Manifest? How so? We have many powerful relics for you to peruse, Lady Terra, Teresa offered from her spot, perhaps hoping to add something to the conversation. Granted, perhaps none as powerful as yours, but we of the Ebon Chalice are no strangers to the holy workings of the Empress' chosen artisans. Oh, maybe after dinner? Twilight offered before looking back to the other sister. Anyway, it's said that when a particular person displays a mighty example of one of 5 virtues, they can manifest one of these relics called the Elements of Harmony. Odd name, the sister replied. But then there are many lost relics from the Age of Darkness. And you say you have already found 2 of them? Perhaps we could aid you in finding the other 3? Teresa asked, leaning in like an excited child. Twilight gave a quick smile, but did not directly address the canoness. Found is a bit of a strong word. It's more like they found us instead of us finding them, Twilight replied. On Rin's world, one of the sisters I was traveling with somehow raised another member of our group from the dead, and was blessed with the element of kindness. Kindness, in this age? Another sister asked. I do trust you, Lady Terra, but I will admit it is a little hard to stomach without bearing witness. Perhaps during your stay here, you and your bodyguards would grant us a demonstration? I can certainly arrange for that, if you would be honored to do so, Lady Terra. Twilight's smile strained. Teresa was trying her best to help, no doubt, but there was trying to be friendly and then there was forcing the issue. Pinky terrorizing a number of newcomers to Ponyville had helped her recognize the differences between the latter and the former quite well. Maybe some other time. We need to speak with the Ultramarines about a few things first before we can do anything else. This seemed to disappoint the Ebon Chalice sisters, but some did seem to accept and return to eating and listening to Twilight speaking. As she talked, Twilight took a moment to check on her companions. Matthias seemed fine, happy even as he worked his way through the food presented. Of course, his eyes were darting about the assembled sisters, tracking the conversation as it moved from one person to the next. Even in a time of peace the Inquisition was always at work. Sunset, though Twilight had never seen someone looking so miserable since Applejack returned from the equestrian rodeo without a first-place finish. Twilight wanted to ask why, but what could she say? Naomi's sisters had grown comfortable around psychers, but talking openly in front of the Ebon Chalice might have raised concerns. Even if they didn't, would Sunset have actually said anything relevant, or just closed up and deflected? Twilight would get through to her eventually. For now, she just needed to settle in with the others. Naomi had never felt this tense since the day Canoness Diana had recommended her for promotion. She followed dutifully behind Palatine Alicia, keeping her gaze forward as she watched the hallways. The only other beings around them were servants and pilgrims, nothing to be afraid of even in the darkest of times, and she still had her girls with her. There was no reason whatsoever for her to be nervous about what was to come. And yet here she was, inwardly trembling like an acolyte being scolded by her sister superior. We have been doing our best with what the local church has provided us, Alicia was explaining, leading them down a hall lined with statues of local saints. I admit I have never had the honor of serving alongside the martyred lady, but I hope it is sufficient for your standards of purity. It is not much different from Palisades, Ruth remarked from behind. The people of Macragge are devout and strong, true exemplars of faith in the Empress. Oh indeed. We have been asking them much about these halls, working to identify which saints are which so that the younger sisters do not fall into confusion. How do you mean? Veronica asked. Surely these are local saints known to Ultramar and Macragge. Have you heard of them outside of this realm? No, we have not, Alicia replied, turning down a less busy hall as she continued. But many of the sisters on this pilgrimage are fresh from the Scola, still fresh in the training of our order. They ask many questions. Which saint is this? Does that saint align with the imperial saints? Surely you have all had similar questions during your training, no? The Gracia convent has always made sure to distinguish between those of the martyred lady, those of the Imperium at large, and those of the local church, Ruth said, giving a dutiful smile. It has helped us keep faith with our commitments to Saint Gracia and the order, and not fuss over those worlds we may only visit in sparing moments. A good response as ever, Naomi thought. Alicia seemed confused by the logic, her face furrowing as she thought over what the younger sister had said. It must be very confusing, having to juggle so many saints in your mind, Alicia replied finally. Naomi said nothing, though she did sense Ruth stiffen for a brief moment. But far be it for me to judge a fellow sister. Come, we must meet with the others. I remember all the saints, thank you very much. Ruth grumbled, just enough that her sisters heard her but not enough to offend the Palatine. Naomi shifted her head enough to let Ruth know she was listening, a silent warning for her to behave and not allow the Ebon Chalice's traditions mar her own faithfulness. They continued down the hallway for another minute, their conversation dying down and leaving them with only the sounds of their footsteps for comfort. In a way, it was refreshing for Naomi, a moment of silence within a holy convent, alone with one's thoughts for the Empress and for the Order. Tara's company had been wonderful, but even a sister of battle needed some moments of peace and privacy. In some ways, it already helped with Naomi's reformed anxiety. They stopped near another set of doors. Unlike the hall where Tara and the Inquisitors had been taken, these were simple wood with only a few ornamental decorations. Another group of guards stood outside, watching the group as they approached. Alicia stopped before the door and turned to face Naomi and her sisters. "Those of our order who are not at the shrine of Guilliman are just beyond," the Palatine said. "As a safety precaution and a show of goodwill, I must ask that you leave your weapons with the guards at the door." Good then, that Tara convinced Judith to leave Frederick at the lander, Naomi thought before speaking. "We will comply, but for my peace of mind would you permit me to carry one weapon? I know you mean no ill will towards us, but in these trying times I do not feel comfortable being so far away from defense." I suppose that is fair," Alicia replied. "Very well, Sister Superior. You may keep your bolt pistol with you during the meal." Naomi nodded, stepping forward and presenting her combi flamer and chainsword to the guards. One by one her girls disarmed, the Sisters of the Ebon Chalice marking the weapons with a small seal to ensure they were returned to their proper owners. Once their weapons were stored away, Alicia turned and pushed the doors open, Naomi and the others following in. 10 long tables were arranged in the center of the hall, with a company's worth of sisters standing at attention around 4 of them. Naomi could only guess as to the exact organization, whether they were broken up by squad or ranks, but each sister of the Ebon Chalice stood in perfect formation, their vision not breaking away even as the newcomers arrived. Along the walls Naomi could see ranks of servants, some carrying platters of food while others carried supplies for cleaning and preparation. Another table was set at the head of the others, and here Naomi saw more of the ranking members of the preceptory other sisters Palatine like Alicia and a gaggle of mini-storm priests scattered among them. They too stood at attention, not saying a word as Alicia led them to the center. The only one out of place was an old priest and his attendants, one of whom carried a smoldering censer and another a bowl of water. Alicia approached the old priest and gave a respectful bow. "Father Curvil," Alicia said as she rose. "I present 5 guests from the martyred lady, guards of the Empress' most blessed student. Grant them your blessing that we may begin with our meal." "I welcome you, honored guests," the old priest said after he had returned Alicia's bow, stepping around the Palatine to face Naomi directly. "I am sure you have come a long way on your journey, and now ask that you permit me to grant you the Empress' holy blessing." "As you wish, my lord," Naomi said, giving the priest a respectful nod. Curvil nodded, turning to the attendant with the bowl and dipping his fingers in the water, stepping up to the Sister Superior before brushing the symbol of the Aquila on her forehead. He repeated the ritual with each member of her squad, mumbling some prayer in High Gothic Naomi could not easily pick out. Once the ritual was complete, the old priest turned to those seated at the head table. "Our esteemed guests have been sanctified before the Church and the Empress, and may now join us in the breaking of bread," he said. Curvil then turned to Alicia before speaking. "Honored Palatine, you may show them to their seats. When you return, I will deliver the blessing." "By your leave," Alicia nodded before turning to Naomi. "You will be seated with Company 6. They are some of our more junior sisters, perhaps your wisdom may be a great boon to them." Alicia led Naomi towards one of the tables, Naomi spotting that 5 seats had been left empty for them, 3 to the left and 2 to the right. Naomi took the one closest to the Ebon Chalice sisters on the left, Ruth taking a spot across from her with Judith while Rebecca and Veronica sat to Naomi's right. A simple procedure, but Naomi did notice a small ripple of surprise among some of the sisters to her left. Did they perhaps spot her injuries and react to that? Naomi only wished to draw her hood further over her face if that was the case. Alicia took her spot at the head table, and with that taken care of, Father Curvil turned to the group at large. "Let it be witnessed that when those of the ecclesiarchy are gathered, there the Empress is with them. Let us not put to shame her holy presence, or the presence of our esteemed guests here tonight. Blessed Empress, guide us as we stand against the dark, and let us not to lose focus on that which you have commanded us, that we may do our mission to bring death upon your foes, whether they be the alien, the mutant, or the heretic. Grant all of us the strength and clarity of mind to turn away heresy at every instance, and grant us the blessing of completing our mission here and the gift of casting our gazes upon the greatest of your sons." Naomi noticed Judith preparing to say something, but a quick jab from Ruth got her to fall silent. This did not go unnoticed, however. "Does one of our guests have something to say?" one of the Palatines asked. Judith's expression dropped, now aware that while most of the Ebon Chalice sisters were not looking directly at her, their confusion and disapproval was palpable. Naomi decided a diplomatic approach would be best. "Apologies for Judith, my lady," she said, turning slightly to look towards the Palatine. "She is often overcome with emotion when in the presence of the Empress chosen, and despite her discipline it has occasionally slipped through. She meant no offense." Judith and Ruth looked surprised at this, but said nothing. After a moment, the sister Palatine responded. "There is no crime in showing devotion to the Empress, I suppose," the Palatine said before looking at Father Curvil. "Please continue with your blessing, Father." "Oh, of course," the old man replied, clearing his throat before continuing. "Blessed Empress, we conduct this meal and time into your hands. May we not grow weak in our bodies or souls, and may we continue to bring death upon the foes of the Imperium. May the Empress protect and guide us always," the other sisters replied. With the blessing said, Curvil moved with his attendants and took a seat at the central point of the head table, the sisters and other priests sitting down once he had made himself comfortable. Now sensing that things were opening up, Naomi looked to Judith. "Is there something you would like to say, Judith?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Out of the corner of her eye she could see both the attendants moving forward to serve the sisters, and a few of the Ebon Chalice eyeing them as well. "Sorry, Sister Naomi," Judith replied, slumping slightly in her seat. "But when he spoke of the greatest of her sons I could not help but think of Lord Vulcan or Lord Corax. How would they react to such an honor being placed upon Guilliman? Your empathy for the Primarchs is welcome, but there is a time and place for it," Naomi replied, giving Judith a sympathetic look. "There's no shame in wondering about such things, Judith. Perhaps you may speak with Lord Vulcan later." "Oh, if he will let me, of course." There was a pause, Naomi turning slightly. Some of the Ebon Chalice sisters were watching them, quickly averting their gaze to their newly arrived food when Naomi turned. "Is something the matter, sisters?" Naomi asked. "Oh," one of the sisters started, wringing her hands before speaking again. She looked down the table to where her superior was seated, the older woman eyeing her for a moment before giving a curt nod. Her confidence restored in part, the young sister turned back to Naomi. It is not proper for us of lesser rank to be speaking to those of higher rank in such a public setting." "But you have questions," Naomi countered. She knew a curious novice when she saw one, and what better way to get them focused on something other than her injuries. Still, this was not the Gracia convent, and thus the laws of the Ebon Chalice were dominant. "My girls may speak for me, if that is your custom." "Really?" another sister asked. "That is a great honor." A pause before the sister looked to Ruth. "Have you really served in the presence of a Primarch?" "Yes," Ruth replied, moving to cut off Judith before she blurted out too much. "To tell the truth, we have stood in the presence of 3 of them, and that is also not counting our time alongside the Empress herself." A collective gasp rippled through the Ebon Chalice sisters, some turning to one another and muttering in surprise. After another round of muttering, the first sister that spoke found her courage again. "Is the Empress truly as glorious as we were told?" "Yes, she is," Veronica added, leaning in to look at the Ebon Chalice sister. "To stand in her presence is an experience I never imagined having the chance to partake in, and to glean from her wisdom and strength." She gave a sigh. "Perhaps in time you will experience the same glory once she returns to us." "The Empress is coming here?" the sister asked, panicking slightly. We are but fresh initiates. We cannot stand in her presence, much less in the presence of the likes of you." "Calm, sister?" Ruth started. The young Ebon Chalice sister choked for a moment as she tried to calm herself. Elizabeth," she replied. "My name is Elizabeth." "There is nothing to fear, Elizabeth," Ruth said, finally taking a bite from the food set before her. "The Empress is truly majestic, but she carries with her an aura of grace and kindness that matches her strength and power. Daunting it may be, once you are in her presence your fears will flow away and be replaced by true awe and sense of purpose." "It's true," Judith chirped. "She has very pretty hair as well. It's always nice to compliment her." Oh, Elizabeth looked crestfallen for a moment. "I am not sure I could do that. I am just a lowly sister." "You cannot be that lowly in her sight," Rebecca offered. Her student was a codicil on some small planet somewhere, as humble a beginning as any. "But I'm Elizabeth," stopped herself, looking to some of her other sisters. Sensing that she was not one to talk, another Ebon Chalice member spoke up. "Elizabeth is a bit of a perfectionist, friends," the other sister replied. "Always wanting to make sure she's doing right by the traditions and customs of our order. Surely you can understand that." "There is nothing wrong with devotion," Ruth replied. "I myself have always strove to follow the tenets of the saints and teachers that came before me as best I can. But still, There is no reason to be concerned about your service displeasing either the Empress or the student. Well, that is good to hear, the second sister said. See, most of us we are lacking in the experiences you have, no doubt. There it was. Naomi had been silent, but she had not been ignorant. She had seen much during the conversation, with how the paladins acted around the priests and dignitaries, and now how the rank and file spoke of their experience and devotion. Every one of these girls was green enough to make an orc jealous. Palatine Alicia did say you were recent graduates from the Scola, Veronica said. If you do not mind me asking, how many combat drops have you had since? The second sister flushed with embarrassment. 3, not including training exercises and wargames. Far too green. It's a good start, though, Judith offered. Give it time, and soon you'll be like us. 300 drops in the last 10 years, and sister Naomi has many more under her belt as well. There is no need to boast, Judith, Naomi replied. I'm not boasting, though. We've been through a lot since you've taken us under your care, and such experience is always welcome among the next generation. There was a pause before Judith frowned. I am far too young to start talking like Sister Hannah. I am sure she is spinning in her grave as we speak. Ruth scoffed. You have been in many battles, Elizabeth breathed, finally mustering up some of her courage from before. What was it like? We only get a few stories from our sisters superior, and never too much information. Harrowing and glorious at the same time, Ruth said, taking over again before Judith could begin. We have fought against many enemies, Xenos and heretics alike. Most recently we stood alongside the student as she battled against a mighty servant of the ruinous powers. The creature could shatter the very ground with its strikes and tear reality asunder, but the student's power was a match for it. She even managed to wound the demon. Judith added, hopping in her seat. I saw it before we had to flee. I know what happened afterward was no good for her, but in that fleeting moment there was real glory. This is amazing to hear. Elizabeth's eyes seemed to grow larger. The student must be a mighty warrior indeed. She is learning, Veronica said. But you no doubt have some mighty warriors among your preceptory. You may be new to your rank, but surely you must learn a lot from your palatins and canoness. The Ebb and Chalice sisters frowned, some of them looking down at their food in uncertainty. Judith and Rebecca exchanged a look before the latter spoke. Is something wrong? She asked. Canoness Teresa seemed very fond of you all during the brief time we spoke to her. Oh no, nothing is wrong. Another sister said. Canoness Teresa has treated us very well, and we are ever thankful for her guidance. She is an ever eager servant of the Empress, just as we all are, Elizabeth said. And she continues to look after us, in supplies and in body. A third sister added. I know it is a frivolous thing, but our ceremonies are always well managed and the food given has been some of the best we have ever received. That is wonderful to hear, Rebecca said. I know our time together may be short, but perhaps one day we can see you and your canoness in battle and see what wisdom she has to offer. Yes. We would enjoy that very much, serving alongside you and the student. The younger sisters continued to chat, but Naomi turned her attention to her food. She had heard all she needed to hear. The rank and file were green, and their canoness was a well-meaning logistician but not a combat officer. It was as if the universe was trying to re-engineer Moria, but then, Ultramar is one of the most secure positions in the galaxy. Surely there could not be a safer place for a batch of green sisters to cut their teeth. That was when Inquisitor Olivier's words re-entered her mind. And looking at these young, almost innocent faces around her, Naomi suddenly realized what needed to be done. End of chapter 3.12, questioning. Easy's note. This is the last chapter posted as of 28th of April 2023 and the story is still marked incomplete. I'll keep this in the watch list for new chapters, but to be honest I've been spending less and less time on film fiction lately, so feel free to comment if I missed it.